but I am sure you can ably represent her. The next panelist. Sorry, I'm used to my touch screen, so. Okay, thank you. This one, eh? Okay. Okay, thank you. So the next panelist is Christine Mujimba or Mugimba? Mujimba, thank you. She is the Director ICT and Research at Uganda Communications Commission. Christine has broad knowledge and expertise in communications, regulation, accumulated over 20 years, and research and development. She holds a bachelor's degree in a bachelor's of science in electrical engineering from the Makerere University, a master's of science in communication systems and signal processing from the University of Bristol, and she's currently pursuing EMBA with Rochester Institute of Technology in the US. She is passionate about ICT innovation. In her earlier years, she birthed UCC's SCI program, an initiative that has for 7 years fostered innovation for ICT
Recording in progress.
She has previously served as a member of panel of judges for the DSTV Etusat Star Awards Pan-African competition that promotes interest in science and space technology. You're welcome, Christine. Wow, I love when women are into these things. Some of us ended up doing law, but I'm sure I'd love to be an astronaut or something. Next is Bart Comil, Digital for Development Expert, Enable. But I hope I've pronounced the name well. Enable. And the Comil, have I? Okay. So Bart is a D4D expert. I would love to know what that means. With a passion for digital technology and innovation, he has been working abroad for the Flemish Association for Development Cooperation and Technical Assistance in Kenya, in Vietnam, and in Zambia. So those who have interest going to this country, don't just dream. We have people here. He has been managing ICT integration in education projects and has helped set up learning-centered places where students, teachers, and lecturers can come to learn, teach, and undertake research while using ICT. In 2016, in working with Enable, the Belgian Development Agency on D4D projects in Uganda, he's currently facilitating the digital transformation process of the NTCs, that is the National Teacher Training Colleges, and VTIs, which is the Vocational Training Institutes. He supports the digital information ecosystem in Uganda through various projects. He has his well-learned with master's, postgraduate in open and distance education, and has a lot of expertise and knowledge to share. I can't wait to hear from you. So that is our panel. So I hope you're happy to be in this elevator. So I'll now hand over to Kananu. Kananu is one of our partner firms. She's live from Kenya. The firm is GVA Advocates, and they're also a leading firm in tech and ICT innovation supporting the Kenyan landscape. So Kananu, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Asmahani. I think I have heard that we have a representative from the Ministry of ICT and not Dr. Zaweda himself. Is that correct, Asmahani? Super. Welcome,
yes,
everybody.
Yes, Kananu, that's correct. We have Silas Ngabirano, who is the commissioner in the Ministry of ICT.
Thank you so much, Asmahane. And so with that, and being mindful of time, and I highly suspect a lot of you want to go and catch your lunch, let me get straight into the discussions with this very illustrious panel. Just by way of introducing this topic, I realized that within East Africa, Kenya is regarded as being the Silicon Savannah. Now, the reality is Kenya has had to navigate very difficult environments to get to where it's gotten, and this has included a very, very peculiar regulatory environment where we've moved from the internet having been declared illegal back in the 90s to a situation where now we cannot imagine not having the internet. I expect that Uganda has had and will have its own challenges as it looks to cascade with the regulatory framework and also the integration of both private and public sector. So that said, I will draw from some of the lessons that we've learned in Kenya while I navigate the conversation with the panelists. As a starting point, I think it's important that we set off with the government, which is represented here by the Ministry of ICT. Maybe we can have some overview of what the Digital Transformation Program under the National Development Plan 3 looks like for Uganda. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. As introduced, my name is Silas Ngabirano. I'm standing in for the Permanent Secretary. So I want to pass on the apologies from the PS who has been unable to attend this engagement because of her busy schedule. In Uganda now we have the NDP3, the National Digital Transformation Program, National Development Plan 3, and unlike NDP1, NDP2, NDP3 is for the first time having a digital transformation pillar. So this is very critical for us to note. It shows the importance the government has now attached to digital transformation. And the main purpose of the digital transformation program is to increase the access and the usage of ICTs in the country. Government having noted that the importance of ICTs has now put emphasis on promoting the availability in terms of penetration and usage of ICTs for service delivery and economic development. So the digital transformation program has 5 pillars, what I would call 5 objectives. The first objective is to strengthen the policy and regulatory environment. And like the moderator has already pointed out, Kenya has been able to reach where they are because of having a very good policy and regulatory environment. So in Uganda also we have got a priority on strengthening the policy and regulatory environment. I don't want to go into details, but most of you will agree with me that Uganda, we have one of the best policy and regulatory regimes. In fact, my colleague here will maybe supplement. My colleague from UNCDF, a couple of years we got support from UNCDF where we did a research on inclusive digital economy scorecard, which was done in 4 countries, Uganda inclusive. And in this research, Uganda was leading in terms of policy and regulatory environment. So this shows evidence that Uganda actually has made a very good strides in terms of policy and the regulatory environment. The other pillar on digital transformation is the increase of national ICT infrastructure coverage. And this is something which the government has taken a lot of emphasis. Now we have extensive coverage by the national backbone infrastructure. We have got extensive coverage by the telecom providers. But I won't go into details. I'll leave my colleague here, the senior engineer from Uganda Communications. She'll provide more insights in that regard. And in terms of usage of ICT national development, most of you agree with me. that the country has really made big achievements in terms of using e-services. Nowadays, if you want a passport, you don't have to go to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And several number of services, they are all available online. And the fourth pillar, or the fourth objective of the digital transformation program is promoting ICT research. ICT research, innovation, and commercialization of ICT solutions. And in this regard, the government has put a lot of investments, got a lot of support to young innovators, and we are now using, for providing e-government services, we are using mostly locally developed solutions. And I think at an opportune time, I'll provide more details. And the last objective for this program is increasing ICT human resource. So in this regard, we have a number of initiatives for promoting human capital in various areas. And I don't want to take a lot of time, but I can provide more details as we move along. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think with that, let me segue in and bring Mr. Lukolio into the conversation. Maybe you can let us know a little bit about the policy that UNCDF has to leave nobody behind in this digital era. We've heard what the government is doing for inclusivity. Maybe we can hear a little bit about what you're doing in collaboration with them.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. So the UN Capital Development Fund is, I think, looking at the topic of this discussion is Uganda ready, right? And what we've focused on is ensuring that, yes, as ready as Uganda might be, how do we ensure that those who are in danger of being left behind are actually not left behind? So there's several of us, there's several members in society who are left out of this conversation, indeed are not even in this room, because maybe they don't have the right knowledge or skills. There might be certain policies so Uganda does a very good job on having the right policies in place, and so how do we implement those policies? So to answer your question, we've worked very closely with the Ministry of ICT to not only, as Mr. Ngabiano talked about, how do you decide where you are today in order to know where you want to be tomorrow? And so it wasn't a policy, it's more of a policy tool. This inclusive digital economy scorecard was developed to allow us to measure where we are today in terms of policy, skills, infrastructure, innovation, and therefore what policy priorities we want to set. We've also worked together to look at policy that can foster innovation. And so how do you bring other sectors, other MDAs to implement policies to sort of foster innovation, but also inclusivity? And so maybe one last one is that recently we are looking at, there's a framework called the Digital Uganda Vision, several policies underneath that. But how do you review, we've worked with government to review those policies to see what's out of date, what needs to be rewritten, what needs to be updated, and so that we can now decide again, what are the policy priorities for this year, for next year. And so we, UNCDF has worked, as was mentioned earlier, we work very closely with government, with private sector, but really it's to serve as a catalyst. Obviously, we don't see ourselves as part of the equation in perpetuity, but that once we are out of the equation, that counterparts in government and private sector are able to continue doing the good work that they do. And so, moderator, that's some of what we've done in partnership with government in relation to policy and regulation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that, but I'll still come back to you and Mr. Ngabiano before I move to the other panelists to ask this. Now, over time, or at least at the inception, what Kenya noted is that we couldn't move the ICT project without infrastructure across the country. We're nowhere near attaining 100%, but there have definitely been projects such as the rural electrification projects, because you need electricity to support ICT infrastructure. You also need mobile network operators to traverse the entire country and provide networking services. And therefore, I think that's where the regulator in the Communications Commission comes in terms of giving a view on the expansiveness of that. But my specific question, and maybe for remark from both you, Mr. Lukolio and Mr. Ngapiano, is the question of, number one, whether there's prioritization and segmentation of two groups. There's the older generation that must still use infrastructure. The older generation definitely will still be your great capital holders. And so if they're transacting on e-government platforms, they need to be equipped and schooled. And on the other hand, you have the young people in school. How are you including those? People with disabilities, women trading in marketplaces. Maybe you can offer some comment around those areas.
Do you want to go first? Thank you so much for that question. So you're absolutely right that you cannot proceed with ensuring that nobody's left behind if you only focus on policy and not on infrastructure. And actually, I will have our colleague from UCC speak more to this, but I'm aware that the government of Uganda has actually mandated mobile network operators to ensure that they have infrastructure to cover the whole country. Now, you do have several, technological aspects that make that possible, but the mandate is in place. But to your question also, infrastructure goes beyond the base stations, right? You also want to make sure that as you extend technology and digital-related services to last-mile communities, even agent networks, that's part of infrastructure. Even access to devices, that's also. So we as UNCDF have actually, one of the pillars of our program is actually on infrastructure, on ensuring that you have what we call, a vibrant ecosystem, that you have payment networks that are accessible, that are usable. And indeed, you make another great point that the older generation who might not be used to some of these new technologies, there is a skills gap that needs to be filled. There is education that needs to happen both on digital and financial literacy, but also for the younger generation. And Uganda is a very young country, that we're working to ensure that there is, either incorporation of digital aspects into traditional curricula, but also that there is, we need to look at viable business models where there are providers of these skills in society who are willing to provide quality services with viable business models. So how do we encourage those to show their business models, and how do we de-risk those so that they can pilot them, they can scale them, and ultimately provide them sustainably? So that's some of the work that we're doing, but maybe Mr. Ngabiano wants to supplement. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And thanks, moderator, for that very good question on infrastructure, inclusive infrastructure coverage. While I would wish to pass this on to my colleague from UCC, I want to just mention one thing, is as government, we have got one policy called the National Broadband Policy, which was set up in 2019. And this policy has set up priorities in regards to infrastructure, which enable the inclusive deployment of ICT infrastructure. It is under this policy that we have priorities like infrastructure sharing for mobile network operators. Previously, each mobile operator was tending to set up their own base stations, but with this policy coming on board, they're now able to do sharing. And it is under this same broadband policy that we have a number of lined up initiatives, including the access of ICT infrastructure to societies or persons with disabilities, to promote, also promoting rural and what I would call vulnerable societies to have access. It is under the same policy that we have been able to promote initiatives like access to free Wi-Fi and related kind of services. But in terms of the other aspects, I would encourage the moderator to also ask the colleague from UCC to add more.
Yes, indeed. I shall do so, and I will bring her into the conversation. Ms. Mugimba, very good to see that many questions are being directed at you. I do not envy your position as a regulator, particularly because we have seen our regulator here being dragged into a lot of litigation, right from the attempts that we had moving from analog to digital. We continue to see a lot of influence and need for our regulators to be more assertive in the roles that they play. So, Ms. Mugimba, to you, from your perspective, what are some of the achievements that your office has had in facilitating the digital transformation program? What are some of the successes?
Thank you very much. And as you can imagine, being a referee of a football match between Kenya and Uganda is not quite an easy task. But yeah, you have to moderate it. And I think it's an honorable task to regulate the sector, because on one hand, you have the government policy that has been stipulated of the aspirations, and it taps into the national digital transformation program. And on the other hand, you have the 44.2 million Ugandans, including those with persons with disability and special interests, women, those who cannot afford, those who can afford, the young, the elderly, all in there, and their interests, and you have to balance all that as a regulator. So what has been our achievements? I think the government already put an enabling environment when they gave us a mandate. As a regulator, I know sometimes people don't want to hear this, but you're only as good as the powers that you're given to you, not to misuse, but to enable you to undertake the interventions, either in protecting the interests of consumers or promoting development through the private sector. And so that act under which we operate enables us to be converged. So as you painted the picture of Kenya coming from the silo where you had the broadcasting sector alone, telecom alone and all that, now we're under converged regulatory regime, and that in itself enhances our interventions. When we are looking at digital transformation, the technology, we are technology neutral. We do not define and say you must come into Uganda and give us 2G. There is no such permit that says come and give 2G, come and give GSMA, CDMA, whatever you want to call it. What we do is to say, as an investor, we have this set of authorizations. You can come in, take a choice of your technology, whether it's satellite, fiber, cellular, Wi-Fi, choose it along your business model, and you can provide services. But in exchange for doing that, you're not just providing services because you're a private sector and the bottom line profit matters to make money. No, we tie in the socio-economic development aspects that are at the heart of transformation. So then we come in and say, on your own as a commercial player, you can be able to give only those who can afford. But we are saying we put obligations. For example, under the national broadband policy, there are obligations that the telecom operators who have opted into being national operators. So we have not forced them, but they have seen that this is a viable market, and they have said we want to serve this whole nationwide. We say you must cover 90% of the geographical coverage with broadband. Now that hasn't always been as is. As you had, the broadband policies new 2018. So previously, the focus was more on starting from basic telephony. Some people in the room here are lucky. Their first phones were smartphones, but there are some who have the history of walking to make a call, having a big, gigantic fixed and all that. So those are all achievements. And where are we right now in terms of numbers? When you look at the broadcasting sector, for example, we have 96% covered in terms of FM signal, and it is difficult to go across the regions without having that, at least having access to broadcasting. When you look at the telephony penetration, if you count 69 Ugandans in 100, every 69 of them have a subscription. Yeah, as in they are subscribed active, meaning put 100 Ugandans in a room, count 69, and there is a likelihood that 69 of them will have an active subscription. They are paying for it and being able to access services. We also have, in terms of the internet penetration, which is saying that we have 53 Ugandans for every 100 being able to be on the internet. And so I think those are some of the achievements that have come with the liberalization and the different incentives. In there, of course, we still have some challenges in terms of cost of access. Not everyone can afford. And what we have done, and again, this has come because the law has given us the power to establish a fund that is able to plug in the gaps in access, and that is the Universal Service and Access Fund. And through this fund, the very private operators contribute a certain percentage, 2% of their annual gross revenue, so they plow it back into the sector, and then we use that to extend services, partnering with different organizations. So under this, we have seen programs emerge, like working with persons with disabilities to give them assistive technologies. We have done digital literacy training for SMEs. We are running, we have been able to partner also with URA to have Wi-Fi hotspots on the different border points across the country. And we are also running some on the demand side, because it's one thing to have the infrastructure, like Chris mentioned. You put all the towers, what next? You have to create some demand. So we are also running some proof of concept where we have had solar-powered tablets given to the people who are who according to the U-Boat statistics have very low earnings, and these are in different parts in the North Amudat. We have some in the eastern side of Kayunga. We have Kayunga and different places where we are piloting, and we have given out at household level over 1,000 tablets or so to be able to this. And all this is collaborative with the private sector. So that is painting a bit of the picture of some of the achievements. But I forgot to announce one of the recent breaking news achievements, I think, for the country. And on behalf of the ministry is, as you appreciate that this is a global environment and we do not act in a silo, and we plug into the International Telecommunications Union, which is the UN specialized agency. This is very important because they are the ones who set the agenda, they are the ones who liaise and come up with sustainable development goals specific to the sector. They define global standards that make sure that wherever you are, you can have the same handset in Kenya and Uganda. And so our participation as a country is important. So the breaking news is that 2 weeks ago, Uganda, having been led by the Minister of ICT and National Guidance, was able to be re-elected to be a member of the council. Kenya also part of this, and that brings us to the conversation on the table where we're able to contribute and articulate the use cases and the local context of Uganda. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Ms. Mugimba, I won't let you go so quickly. I'll still want to bring you back a little bit. And it's a simple question that touches centrally on the consumer of these very sophisticated services that we're getting from internet, telephony, and the extent to which private sector players will want to maximize on their profits. So what I want to check with you is whether, as you're regulating, there are specific interests of the consumer that you're looking to safeguard or to prevent abuse of.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Of course, otherwise there will be a riot here if I say that if we are not protecting consumers. But yeah, some of them are quality. So we don't just want any kind of service. So we have defined different standards. If you're providing services, cumulatively on your network, you should not have many congestion, yeah? More like traffic jam on the route, if I can say that. So we have these standards set for call drops, successful calls, so that everyone begins to take a call. There is a certain guarantee that of all the calls made on a network, yeah, at least less than 2% get congested. And we set these standards and we keep reviewing them. We monitor, we publish them to name and shame, so that that's how we empower you consumers. You can see and make a choice and say, no, this network is not good for us. We have also rolled out quality of experience tools where you're able to tell how your network provider is doing. I don't know if you've heard of the NetG tool, but it's available, an app that you can download and also be able to tell how you're doing. So that is one way the quality is very much. As you know that usually there's a trade-off between quality and price, yeah? And usually, we know this even for other commodities, eh? The cheaper, the mass you go, the probability is the standard may fall, but we want to ensure and have an eye on that. The other is, as these gadgets come into play, and now we are building a local capacity to manufacture, we have the SIMU assembling plant, which is supported by government, is that also we don't want counterfeit products, anything that goes. So we have what is called type approval, where we require manufacturers and people who send and distribute to come in and have their models brought to be checked and see whether they meet specifications, whether they have been tested in certain labs, and actually when you say this is a phone, what is within it, how it has been built really functions as a phone, and so the same for the base stations. The other, of course, the sensitive part is price, yeah? Give me my money, my money's worth. Some of this is left, it's done in the way of competition, because the more players you have, they'll compete for all, and that will drive our prices down. But some of these costs actually happen to when your call is being, like in the case of Uganda, you're on MTN network, your call is going, you're calling someone in Airtel, there's a cost for you to be handed over. And so usually the operators will charge a certain rate, and if that is not managed, it may be so high, and what happens, of course, it is passed to the consumer. So what we have done, I think in 2018, we came up with mobile termination rates where we said, this is the reference rate that you will charge between the operators, so that it was not being abused, maybe the bigger players, and then being passed down to the consumer, and that is due for review. So we have such interventions that we put into place to ensure that the rights of consumers. The other is, of course, within the authorizations, the permits and the licenses. We require them, for example, to tell us what their private and data protection policies are for, and how they are managing that. There are controls within them. We do the audits through our different teams to ensure that they have put enough internal controls in line with different parameters. We also have put requirements in how they commission and decommission their equipment, because e-waste is one of the challenges that has come with the digital transformation, and the ministry knows that they are policies, they are handling with policies, so that is also something we look at in terms of protecting the interests of the consumers, to ensure that for what they pay for, they get. The other is we also have an eye on the service level agreements to ensure that issues of interest of consumers are handled. We also arbitrate very many disputes that can come. We have a consumer toll-free line where you can call. We are always getting complaints. Actually, majority of the complaints are around fraud, now that we have the digital finances onto the network. So we handle all that among others. Yeah, thank you. But maybe what I can say is, even as we protect the rights of the consumers also have, and this is one of the challenges that has come with the digital transformation, responsible use of this infrastructure. They also have an obligation for responsible use and to also pay for what they have subscribed to in terms of the terms that they have signed up to. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mugimba, and I think this is why Mr. Ngabiano was requiring you to speak. I think you have really shared with us some very good information in terms of stakeholder engagement and the key roles that all parties, the commercial entities, government, and private sector play in this space. Bart Cornel, I want to bring you into the conversation now. Invariably, development has been fast-tracked by the uptake of technology across Africa and also in various parts of Europe. Maybe you can let us know a little bit about D4D, your organization, and then let us know what it does and how it integrates within the Ugandan ecosystem.
Yes, thank you very much. The Belgian Development Agency launched, together with the Belgian government, an D4D strategic note in 2016, a note on digital for development. And like Chris is mentioning, one of the principles is leaving no one behind, social inclusion, or the use of big data. And why the Belgian government set up this strategic note on D4D is, of course, we noticed that something has changed in the last decade in Africa as a whole, and then, of course, also in Uganda. There is a unique digital innovation ecosystem has been put in place. First of all, in the fintech sector, that was unique to the continent. And I always say the same or stress, in Europe we don't have mobile money. This was invented in Africa. So provokingly, I always say you're ahead of us. And it is true, it is quite unique, the digital ecosystem that has been developed around mobile money in terms of services. If you see what Kenya has been going through in the last decade, it is simply amazing, also in Uganda. So in terms of development agency, we have embraced digital technology to really you use leapfrogging or leverage development to do things differently after 20 years. And so that is what we have been trying to do in our 16 partner countries, to really look at the issues at hand, the problems, the challenges, and to see if there are digital solutions available. Now in Uganda, in our current program, we mainly work with the Ministry of Education and Health. And in education, of course, this is the Ministry of Education and Sports, and we work, like you were saying, in national teacher training colleges and vocational training institutes. So there, since 2019, we have been looking at the digital transformation of these institutions. This is, of course, at institutional level, not policy level. So meaning financial management, academic management, HR management, how can we transform that? And we were in the middle of doing so, and then COVID struck. So suddenly the schools were closing, and we had to come up with educational solutions to ensure the continuity of learning. And we didn't need to convince anyone anymore of the power of these new technologies. So we set up a sandbox, an experimentation sandbox, let's say, to start looking at possible free educational tools that are at hand at everybody's mobile phone, but also at a feature phone. How can we use WhatsApp to share lessons and even give feedback and give tests? How can we use Google Classroom? How can we record a podcast, and so on and so forth? Now, after 1 year since COVID struck, we did a survey, and we actually noticed that 77% of the students that were then living in their communities at home were participating in e-learning. So of course we missed some percentage, of course, but at least 77% of the year 2 students in the NTC could participate in their final exams. I am actually sure we had a similar situation in Europe, in Belgium. If you would look at the numbers of people participating in e-learning or using educational technology, the numbers wouldn't be that much higher. So again, there's huge potential, of course, for these educational tools in education, but also in health and other sectors. So I don't know if I have answered your question fully, but this is what we are doing at Enable in Uganda. And now we see something interesting happening. It's D4D is not only high on the Belgian agenda, but also at the European level. For the very first time, there are huge budget lines available to assist the digital transformation of Africa. And you were mentioning the last mile connectivity, for example, the D4D hub, the EU D4D hub, is currently supporting a research on how to transform the postal offices in Uganda into ICT hub to ensure the use of e-government services in those last mile areas. That postal office would also serve as a training center for digital skills for young and elderly people or people that normally don't have access. So all these things are happening at the moment in Uganda within Enable.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bart. I think that definitely emphasizes the need for collaborativeness, especially in the education space, to make sure that there's good uptake of the tech itself, because without the skill set, then of course you have a challenge in having people participate in deriving the service. I can simply give an example where, based on my practice area, I practice in the courts in Kenya. For a very long time, we resisted the idea of having electronic courts or moving in that direction. But with COVID, we have had to adapt. And the resistance there was definitely a judiciary that was much older and acclimated to certain systems. But again, the change of tide and the need for leapfrogging has really pushed us into that space. Now, this allows me to move on into a different aspect of our conversation across all 4 panelists, which is the challenges encountered. And I think I'll want to start with the government, the ministry, in the usual way, to simply ask the question of what difficulties the ministry is facing in an attempt to implement the very great initiatives we have had being spoken of.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's switch off. Well, I don't know where to begin, but like any other initiative, there are challenges. But I'll just highlight a few. One of the challenges we find is low levels of awareness. In our country, you notice that people are not very much aware of the potential of ICTs. This is when you speak in general terms of the population. If you go out there, most people think the internet is WhatsApp, the internet is Facebook. So people have endeavored to procure smartphones, but they don't make much value of these phones. They use the phones for gossiping, they use the phones for such related kind of, instead of using them for accessing services, accessing useful information. So this is a challenge which is there. And even in other elite people, you would expect to be different. We still have a challenge.
Yeah.
I could say probably maybe in a small voice, even maybe with the political leaders. And so we need to have increased awareness for everyone so that we can know what potentials are there in terms of ICTs, what they can do for us in terms of transforming our economies. And the other challenge, which is I can mention, is a lack of complementary infrastructure. Yes, we have rolled out this broadband, we have rolled out these ICT services, but for them to be fully utilized, we need to have electricity, we need to have roads, we need to have other kind of infrastructure, which is not necessarily ICT. Because if you are in a village and you don't have power, you cannot use a computer, you cannot use your phone, you'll be having constraints. So this, and in Uganda, probably, we don't have full coverage of power. So this is something which needs to be looked into. And the other issue is lack of investments in the ICT sector. Well, in our country, we lack people like venture capitalists. We lack financial services for people who have innovative ideas, for people who want to endeavor and expand their businesses. So they find challenges. The cost of capital is high, and these limit the production of the would-be good ICT solutions. And lastly, if I can mention one of the other challenges is probably we have limited research in ICT. We have limited efforts in research, limited funding, and this in a way affects the innovation, the capacity to innovate, and it affects the way the level or the magnitude of the products we produce. So in short, these are the challenges I think are critical for us to encounter and try to overcome so that we can have a more flourishing ICT environment.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Ms. Mugimba, let me bring you in on that aspect of some of the difficulties, because one that's been pointed out quite clearly is one of awareness, and I like that it's been flagged. It's the question of the utilization of the asset of ICT and what it can open up to. I'll give you an example of just the use of it. In Kenya, there is the proliferation of View Sasa, which is a TV station that I think streams quite a lot of, shall I say, there are these televised series that really are very low in the quality of content they have. And for a while there, I've wondered if our regulator will censor and stop the circulation of that information and replace it with more forward-looking content. But to you as a regulator, what do you make of awareness? How does government policy allow people to use technology responsively to the development needs of a country?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, awareness is one of the critical pillars of all the interventions we do, because you need that stakeholder buy-in for sustainability. You don't want to just throw a product there if for example, it's coming through our universal service access without the raising awareness. So what we have done as a commission is routinely, and this has been over like 9 years or so, we have different programs where we go out in Uganda and hold what are called, for example, consumer parliaments. So in these parliaments, you have the stakeholders, the operators coming on one side, us we are put on the spot as the regulator, and the consumers are raising different issues. And that, and that interchange enables everyone to be aware of what is happening in terms of when you're interacting with the different services. We also have collaborated. Right now, this month is actually Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and security is one of the critical things, and the theme is seeing yourself in cybersecurity. So we are collaborating with the ministry, with different partners, Milana firm who is positioned in this, to raise awareness on our different platforms. And we also have our computer emergency response team, the UGSAT, which is always pushing out information. Basic things like, is your gadget updated? Do not just click anything. I don't know if people have heard of, there's a campaign called Tomfera, which means that, how do I? Don't fake me or defraud me. Yeah, actually coming into this meeting, I had someone trying to defraud. I was once called and someone told me, hello, I work with Uganda Communications Commission. I'm the executive director. And I let them go on for a while. And then they started saying my number is going to be disconnected. So I'm also a consumer. I don't think our numbers are prioritized. I'm going to be disconnected. And then I tell this person, oh, really? I'm going to arrest you first. And then they started to abuse me. Yeah? So we have that awareness, but I've also been almost defrauded once before. Someone calls you and says, I have a problem. So social engineering is used. They play with Ugandans are friendly and what, so someone will speak your language, get you. So that awareness, raising awareness. The other awareness is we have issues of people saying my data bundles have been stolen. I don't know where they have gone. And whereas, yes, sometimes maybe it may be an issue that maybe the network is down, network outage, but other times it's really what is happening on your gadget, what is running behind. It's like starting your engine and leaving it running, and then wondering why your fuel is going down. So it is a critical component. Also through our strategic partnerships is one of the ways we're able to raise awareness. One of the challenges is taxation. Whereas our sector in the NDP 3, the ICT sector was stated to have contributed 3% to the GDP, but also it's heavily taxed, yeah? It's an easy cash cow, and we all know the story of the OTT tax and how it went and exited and all that. So part of the awareness is even at that level, government to government, with our different peer regulators, being able to bring the data in that session before there was that issue of having evidence-based policy to show that, you know, if you're putting this tax, what is going to be the impact? So part of that awareness is actually saying, let's have baseline studies, let's have research that generates information to show, for example, what is the impact on taxation on the sector, or what are the access and usage. And once you have that data, then you can advocate for pro-digital transformation policies with the different stakeholders. The other example I can give of awareness, it was touched on a bit by Mr. Cyrus Ngabirano, of the issue of the other complementary services. So for example, you've all seen a road that has been tarmacked, and then someone comes and digs, puts a water pipe in there, also fiber optic cable is cut, there's a network outage and all. So we have had to have those collaborations with our different government agencies to say, look, if you're going to dig or roll out infrastructure, is there a way we can have like one dig, one policy or trench where everything passes, and having those conversations, because for when that goes out, it also goes back to you and I in terms of the cost and the network, and it affects the business. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mukimba. I am informed to be conscious of time, and therefore I'll just invite Mr. Lukolio. Kindly then, having heard of the areas of difficulty, because I'm certain this will be mirrored also in the development world, would you have any off the top of your head, any solutions or suggestions of solutions that could be put in place to overcome some of the challenges being faced?
Yeah, thank you so much. Indeed, the challenges are never-ending. I mean, governing, managing a large population like the one in Uganda, you still have, as I mentioned, several who are lacking the right knowledge, the right skills. And so I think in terms of solutions, we've talked about how the regulatory regime in Uganda is really on the right track. I think that right now, it would be good to understand from the side of UNCDF, we try to be a catalyst. We try to enable private and public sector partners to do what they do for the good of their citizens. And so I think in terms of policy, understanding the capacity gaps that policymakers have would be great. It would also be good to know what training needs are required to in order to implement those policies that are already in place, because I think they're facing the right direction. You have the right agencies in place. And also, I think in terms of innovation is a big one. It's a young population, several ideas come through, but we still struggle to raise money. Attracting financing in this environment is quite hard. And so, again, we try to find innovative ways to de-risk some of these new innovations that are that come into the market to allow us to reach underserved communities, to allow us to bridge those knowledge and skills gaps, but also gaps in terms of just access and usage. So for us, it's really to continue that dialogue and understand where those gaps are so that we can continue to foster that inclusive innovation, that we can continue to bridge those gaps in skills within the population, but also on the policymaker side to see what are those gaps that are preventing these otherwise good policies from being put in place, so that I think otherwise the country is on track, and I think we're ready if we can address those. Thank you so much.
All right. Bart, let me bring you in on that score as well. Any comments on some of the solutions we can see coming up into the education development space?
I think a lot have been said by my colleagues. When I mentioned we are working in an NTC and in a VTI, as Enable, we also set up the infrastructure, meaning in terms of electricity, if the power is not there, we have generators. The whole colleges are networked. The VTI have state-of-the-art equipment. So we are actually working in an environment that is really conducive to ensure the continuity of learning, or even to promote e-learning or hybrid learning after post-COVID. So we are actually working in an environment that can be very different from other settings or communities. And we now are venturing into a new portfolio, actually, as starting of 2023. And in terms of, for example, education, we continue working in education and in health and agriculture. But in terms of working in education, we are now moving towards secondary education. And as you know, even much better than me, that is a whole different story. So these NTCs, these VTIs, are now, fully equipped in terms of infrastructure, but moving to secondary education in terms of digitalization or the use of educational technologies. Maybe invite me next year for your symposium, and I will be more elaborate on that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bart. And also let me thank the panelists. I'm conscious that I think you have to go for the lunch break in order to catch up with the program being conducted in the other room. So thank you so much to all of you. I think you have enriched the conversation. To the attendees in the auditorium, I'm sure Asmahane will give guidance on how and where you can direct the questions. But I thank you once more for your participation and also for taking in a lot of the good information that has been shared by our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kananu. Thank you to our participants and audience. So if you have any questions, you can. Okay, we have a poll running on our Q code, which our QR scanning code, which I think is almost everywhere and everywhere. So you have it in the notebook, you have it on the tables where we've been sitting, we have it around, so there is a poll where you can share your questions or comments. We are unable to take them now because of time. But other than that, everything else will be consolidated into questions and then shared with the panels. If there's any information that we need to share, then we'll be able to share through the contact addresses that you have shared with us. Thank you so much to our distinguished panel. I think this has been a very, very informative discussion. I have been writing and writing and writing. I think I'll write something out of this because it's been so enriching for me personally. There's been a lot, you think you know so much, but then there's still so much you need to know, especially around the ICT space. So thank you so much to the distinguished panel. Kananu, thank you for the moderation. Yeah, I love it when we act on things. This is really technology being tested. She's live from Kenya, but she's managed to be part of the conversations as our collaborating firm. So thank you. I think the coupons have been shared for lunch. The ushers are there to guide you where we're going to have our lunch. We look forward to our next sessions, which will start at 2:30, 2:15. Okay, so let's be mindful of time. We'll come back to the main room before we break out again. Okay, so again, the code has the program, so you'll get to see what breakout sessions we have, what conversations we're still going to have in the afternoon. So you can be able to decide which conversation you want or where you want to fit in, and there is everything for everyone in terms of the theme that we're running at the symposium. So thank you very much. Maybe I'll hand over to Catherine to just add on to what okay.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I will not take up much of your time, seeing as it's lunchtime and we've already eaten into your time. So we're going to have 3 breakout sessions. One will be in the Majestic Hall, which is this one, and that will be closing or breaking the digital divide, expectations versus reality. We shall have a second breakout session in the Victoria Hall, which is the main one up there. And it will be the e-government as a path to digital transformation in Uganda. And thirdly, we shall have the third breakout session, which will be in the Regal Room. And that's on commercial diplomacy, Uganda's achievements and lessons learned. I would go into detail, but yes, it's lunchtime and we've eaten into your time. Yes, also the coupons have been given out and the lunch is at the poolside. So, yes. Yeah. The one this side, yes. Also, we'll have the panelists take a photo with the partners. I don't know, do we have it? I think we'll have it outside, yes. Thank you.
You can then try.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very good afternoon to our online audience. I know that in the room we have a smallish group, but I know that we have a larger audience online. So my name is Chris Lucolio, and I'm honored to be moderating this panel. The question that we shall be discussing today is really around closing the digital divide. There's a lot of theory, there's a lot of expectation, there's been a lot of efforts to narrow that digital divide. And yet, up until today, we still struggle. Kasi, Mele, you're welcome.
Thank you.
We have Evelyn Namara from the Alliance for Affordable Internet. You're very welcome. And we have Shem Dungu, Manager of Digital Banking from Equity Bank. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So you think this panel was almost made originally for this topic because it fits so well into just the various aspects that contribute to this digital divide. And I think that as we get into it, I'll be asking colleagues to share with us their own experiences as to why we still have the challenges. So, from Digital Frontiers, Diana, you deal a lot with skills. Why are we still not able to have the right skills in place to enable us to close that digital divide? GSMA brings together several mobile network operators in various countries, various markets. So infrastructure still remains a challenge. Why are we not able to close that? And of course, Evelyn, when we talk about affordable internet, pricing is still a big thing, big deal. We still talk about how it's very expensive to get online in Uganda and similar markets. So we'll be asking about the challenges there. And of course, from Equity Bank, banks are accused of lagging behind in terms of technology to reach underserved markets. So maybe we'd like to hear what's Equity doing in terms of leveraging digitalization to try and close that digital divide. Okay? So I think I'd like to start from the skills perspective. Diana, this will be over to you. What challenges are you seeing? Why are we still not able to close this digital divide despite all our best efforts? Or are we not trying hard enough? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. Regarding the digital divide, we still have a gap. I would say we divide it into two. We have the rural-urban gap. The skilling is taking place in terms of training people. We as the Digital Frontiers Association, in line with, together with the Digital Frontiers Institute, we have courses where we upskill people on the digital finance in different areas, and this is being done. However, as a country, we still have a gap in that area because we have high levels of illiteracy. At least you can see that there is something happening in the urban area. But when you go into the rural areas where the majority are, the people who really need to be included financially in the digital ecosystem, you find that there are high levels of illiteracy. And when you look at literacy in itself, I would say there are three types of literacy. There is the education literacy, where people need to know how to read and write. And so in order for us to close that gap, not just the private sector or the associations can be able to handle that. We need to be able to collaborate with government to be able to address that. That is the basic level of literacy, the education literacy. Then you have to go to the financial literacy. How do you handle your finances, generally speaking, looking at finances? And then you have the digital literacy, where you have your mobile phone. How do you send mobile money? How do you save on the phone? So in order to be able to cover all those categories of literacy, we need a lot of collaboration. We need a lot of initiatives to work, not just the private sector and the associations, but we also need to work with government to be able to reach out to those areas to cover that gap. And when it comes to literacy, it's not a short-term thing that I'm going to educate these people and it's a quick fix and we will be able to close that gap. We have to have a mid-term to long-term plan to be able to systematically address those education skills, the digital skills and financial skills, in order to be able to close that digital divide that is existing in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And indeed, you're absolutely right that while there is low levels of digital and financial literacy, there are low levels of basic literacy, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we incorporate those into basic curricula to be able to close that gap? And so it's a major challenge. I totally agree. I've seen this out in the field. Mele, maybe let's talk about infrastructure. So again, we talked about earlier about how policymakers have mandated that mobile network operators have coverage across the country. And yet we still have areas where you'll go and have no signal, or you'll have other types of infrastructure lacking. What's the gap there? What's preventing us reaching those goals in order to have inclusive digitalization?
Thanks. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks for that question. I think the infrastructure piece is where it all starts, of course, in the digital inclusion story, and that's very important. I do want to take one step back before going a little bit into the infrastructure piece, if you would allow.
Absolutely.
I think when we talk about the policies that are in place and the challenges of why we're not there yet in terms of achieving the digital inclusion, it's really about implementation, and we need to better understand where to spend limited resources. So that was discussed this morning. We need to know where can we get the most impact for the limited money that we have. And that's not a question specific to Uganda, that's a question for a lot of countries. So when we look at the current status of digital inclusion in Uganda, we see actually, if we look at it from an infrastructure perspective, there's been a huge progress being made over the past 5 years. So collectively, all mobile operators in Uganda have last year invested $150 million in infrastructure. So that's very substantial, especially if you compare that to 5 years ago when that was 100 million. So we do see a very strong push into continued infrastructure investments to not only expand connectivity in the areas that are not connected, but also to improve the connectivity that is there. We all want to be meaningfully connected. So we want to have an internet experience that is satisfying, enriching, productive, and at an affordable price. This, however, needs to be balanced. All these investments goes at the backdrop of reduction in the average revenue per user. So we've seen actually a reduction last year of 8%. So we have this pressure on prices, while at the same time we have this pressure to invest. So it's very important for the policy environment to make sure that actually it's most efficient for telecom operators and the market to be able to invest as productive as possible. So there's a couple of things that can happen, both in terms of innovation and new type of technologies. A lot of our members are innovating with new, cheaper type of technologies that can be implemented in rural areas. So that is also something the GSMA has supported MTN on. They did a project in the north of Uganda, implementing a rural connectivity solution that is much cheaper than existing infrastructure, because for existing infrastructure you have a large, let's say, iron pole and a concrete base, and this is a solution which does not require those inputs. So this is impacting the lives of 30,000 people in North, and it shows how, together with innovative startups, let's say, we can find new solutions. From a government perspective, it's all about creating the environment to how is spectrum allocated. So we do know that some of the 700 and 800 spectrum bands, so that is the spectrum that would allow you to reach rural areas, it's not yet allocated in Uganda, so that's a consideration to take as well. But also in terms of the taxation environment and what we heard the UCC say this morning, Christine, around the Universal Service Fund. How do we organize the projects that are being implemented by the Universal Service Fund, and who is also contributing to the Universal Service Fund? There's a lot more to say on that, but I'll keep it to that for now.
No, thank you so much. And it's true that there is greater investment now than there was last year and the year before that from telecom operators in infrastructure. And so, of course, policymakers have a role to play. You can't just have all the base stations and all the coverage if it's still expensive to extend the service. And it's also good to hear about cheaper technology always coming on the scene. I think there's also a role to play here in terms of, yes, how do you take advantage of that to have policies in place that allow operators to actually use these cheaper technologies to extend service. We'll come back to you, but let me now talk about, affordability. And now more than ever, yes, we can still have feature phones, and you can do a lot with your USSD session, but so much more utility is derived from a smartphone experience. And if you don't have access to internet coverage, you're missing out on a lot of services that are not just for leisure, essential services. So, Evelyn, what can you tell us about pricing? What are we getting wrong? Who's to blame here? Policymakers? Private sector? Thank you.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Yeah, so thank you so much, Chris. And I'm glad you started with that, because so many times when you look at the surveys that are being done, and we're all excited. We had a session before with the government and the ministry folks. When they give you all of the statistics about where we've come, it looks really nice and glossy. But when you talk about internet usage, what do we really mean? And I'm glad that you brought it in that context, because if I have an auntie in the village and she has a semi-basic smartphone and she uses WhatsApp once in a while, someone would actually consider that as internet usage, even if it's not used on a regular basis. And that would be put in the same bucket as me, who's in the city, and I use a faster internet. I can access all of these streaming services and everything. So there's already a disparity in what we are considering to be, effective internet usage. So research from the Alliance for Affordable Internet actually, sort of put the bar higher. and said, let's look at meaningful connectivity. What does it mean to be meaningfully connected? And there's 4 different indicators. Regular internet use. You should be able to use your internet regularly, and that means every day. You should have an appropriate gadget. You talked about smartphones. You should actually have a smartphone, because like you said, you can't just rely on USSD. You're losing so many opportunities out there if you're just using a feature phone. Yes, they are doing great, but there's so much more that we could use. And also enough data. You should have enough data on your phone to be able to do the things that you need to do. And last but definitely not least, a faster connection. So when you're looking at all of those 4 things and thinking about where Uganda needs to be, we are speaking about middle-age income, we are speaking about being in the digital age. How many people can afford all of those 4 different components and say they're having a meaningful connectivity, or they actually achieve that? It's very expensive. And I think one of the reasons it is expensive, especially unique for Uganda as a country, digital taxation is one of those things. I mean, when you think about the cost of smartphones, it's still very, very expensive to afford a smartphone. I think there's research from CPESA. I'll just read through some of the different, I think, taxes they say that we have. So we have like a 12% excess tax on internet data. We have 18% on VAT. We have 12% on excess duty on prepaid and postpaid internet. So it's really very, very, very still very expensive for people to afford. And so there's a lot to do from a policy perspective, definitely. There's a lot to do from, I think we need to do a lot of private-public partnerships. There's a lot to do there, but we still have a long way to go because the issues that we are facing are still vast. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Interesting take there. So you're absolutely right. It's very easy to focus simply on price, but I think what I'm hearing you saying is, look, it also has to be the right price for the right value. So meaningful connectivity. Don't just give me a cheap phone or cheap connectivity when I can't really actually use it. You also talked about taxation. You're absolutely right that a lot of what we see as the end consumer is actually pricing passed on by the service provider, because if I'm being taxed as MTN, yes, I will definitely charge more. And these are indeed the conversation around why are we still failing to bridge that digital divide. I'm going to come to you, Equity Bank, in the private sector. If we had all the skills and all the infrastructure in place and all the pricing was right, would we be all set? I mentioned earlier that banks are accused of sort of lagging behind when it comes to innovation. What are you seeing? How are you leveraging technology to try and close that gap? Are you closing that gap? And what are the challenges that are holding you back?
Thank you so much, Chris. And once again, I want to congratulate KTA and the entire sponsors for yet another annual symposium for trying to bridge the digital divide across the country. And I belong to the Equity family, where we've tried to leverage on technology to close the digital divide. Everyone in this house and also online knows that the financial literacy levels of Uganda is around 19%. Digital inclusion is about 20% nationwide, and the awareness, knowledge awareness for Uganda is around 60%. So Equity Bank, first of all, resonates with KTA to try and sort of make Ugandans financially inclusive. So Equity Bank anchors on major 6 pillars, and one of them is financial literacy and financial inclusion. And over a couple of years, Equity Bank has had a financial journey or a technological journey. Everybody in this house and online knows how Equity Bank was the first bank to anchor agency banking in Uganda. All that was sort of tried and demystify banking across the setup. I tried to tell people that please do not fear these bricks and mortar, where you come in the banking world and probably you're disregarded. That Equity Bank came along and told people banking is not for the rich, is not for the pastors or the reverends, or is not for those who studied or are learned, but banking is for everybody. In that sense, It was trying to demystify the fact about banking, and it came on board and brought agency banking in Uganda. And currently we're trading over 2,000 active agents, where we brought a bank closer to the footprints of the people. Again, in terms of the technological advancement, Equity Bank reinvented the star 247, which is a short code for the persons that are using the future phones. Once you dial star 247 hash, you have the bank in your palm. And we've also taken away the sign here, sign there of the paperwork. Even if you're in home or at every time of the day, you dial star 247 hash, you'll be able to open an account at Equity Bank. And then you'll be able to transact. There are a lot of technical innovations to make that application transactable. The interface, what happens in the banking world, or for people with smartphones, is the same experience that the people with feature phones have. In that sense, Equity Bank leverages on technology to try and bring closer to bridge that financial literacy gap, which is around, I said, 19%, to closer to 70%, and try to close the financial divide in Uganda. So those are one of the initiatives, for the traders, SMEs, and MSMEs. We've tried to do a product dubbed Pay with Equity. So with Pay with Equity, when you are a stall owner or a business lady, mama mboga, somebody selling pancakes alongside the road, you just open up a till number, which is a Pay with Equity number, and you can be able to be cashed in across all the deliverables. I mean all channels, telecos or receipt banks. Everybody can be able to buy your products, and then they be able to cash in into your merchant ID or trading number immediately. So Chris, those are one of the initiatives that Equity has done. I know banks are doing a catch-up game in Uganda, that we know, that the telecoms have moved the bigger step. But as Equity, we're trying to close that gap so swiftly and quickly. And I know other commercial banks are following suit. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for that. I'll come back and press you a bit on, because you do mention several of the initiatives that are in place, but are you actually seeing the sign-up, the uptake? Because indeed, there are several products, I think even the agency banking, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because this has been hailed as the next way to get our underserved communities banked. But are bank accounts what they need, or do they need something else? Just real quick, and then I'll go to the panel members. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris. For a local individual, a medium individual in Uganda, their needs is a basic needs. But how do they achieve basic needs? Apart from what banks do most, most banks bridge services or financial services to the local need. So at Equity, we've even demystified the lending procedure, because every person, for a startup or somebody who wants to do a business, they will need money. So we've also included them into the digital finance. So you just dial star 247 hash, you go on a digital lending, and whatever case a systems pre-qualifies you under a certain logarithm, and you're able to get that pre-qualification, and you're able to borrow. So in that sense, there's inclusion in terms of business development, because you will not be included when you're poor. That one we know. So we've seen a lot of uptake. People borrow a lot. People transact a lot on our agency. Actually, as I speak, our transaction footprint is that we do 70-30. 70% of our transactions at Equity happen outside the banking hall. So we left with little 30% of it. And our goal is to have at most 10% of the transaction to happen in the banking hall. So what does that mean? Tell you, Chris, that there's a lot of adaptability. People have adopted our digital channels, and we see traction in that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'd like to go back to the issue of skills. And colleagues, you'll notice, so our audience online, those in the room, you'll notice there are a couple of themes here. UNCDF focuses very much on this issue of narrowing this digital divide, and indeed issues of policy, infrastructure, skills, innovation are central to our mandate. So I'm going to focus very much on those, and indeed I'm going to come back to skills. Diana, maybe you can tell us what are we doing wrong? So we all agree the skills are lacking. And I've done some of the Digital Frontiers courses, that they're online, and so of course to somebody like me, yes, they are accessible. But I want us to focus on a refugee or rural farmer. Are we doing the right things in terms of training? Are we thinking about this thing the wrong way? Are we even designing for them? What's your take on that? Because we agree the skills are lacking. But what are we doing wrong in delivering the training?
Thank you very much, Chris, for that question. When it comes to skills, like you said, the underserved, like the refugees, the women in the village, and many other people, sometimes the mode of delivery of these skills does not fit the people in those areas. And just like I said, we have some high levels of illiteracy. Just the basic education is lacking. So in terms of delivery, you find that some of these courses are online, and you need to have a smartphone, you need to have internet, which these people in the rural areas do not have. So in order for us to close this divide, I think we need to do a sort of segmentation whereby you segment how you deliver the information to the people in the village, the people in the urban areas, and in the village, the disabled, the women, because each person has a different profile and they look at things differently. So it will be more of having physical engagements. You map out the areas where the disabled are, or the women. We work through the local councils, the local leaders, and gather those people and then begin to deliver this kind of information to them. That way, we take some strides towards closing the gap. Otherwise, what is currently happening, the skills gap closure is mainly happening for the urban areas. It is good, but not good enough, because when people like you and I in this room who are literate are skilled enough, then we can be able to use this information to now break it down to the people in the rural areas. So skilling is happening, it's having its impact, and that is why we are having these discussions in the room. And then based on the knowledge that we have, we can work together with the different stakeholders, with UNCDF, with Bank of Uganda, with UCC and the different regulators in the country to be able to now close this gap in those different areas, especially the vulnerable, like the refugees and the disabled. We can just craft some programs for them and be able to close the gap. I believe when we do this, we will take some good strides in closing the gap of illiteracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. And indeed, yeah, so the method of delivery is very important. I've actually had colleagues out in the field interact with communities and say, okay, here's, if you press here, what happens? To design with them rather than for them. So very important point there. Maybe Evelyn, let's talk about, earlier on we mentioned that indeed pricing, so the cost of service delivery happens because yes, service provider is being taxed, or cost of equipment is high, so that's going to be passed on. But we also keep hearing about the idea that with the right partnerships, so there's so many foundations that are actually dedicated to cheap access to the internet, cheap access to services. Facebook has even talked about balloons in the sky to make it easier for us all to access internet. So what are some of those public-private partnerships that could be leveraged to bring down the cost? Could we have, somebody else was talking about a smartphone that you have, where you get the smartphone for free, but you have to watch adverts, and then that's how they're paying for your device, and you have the device. So what are some of those public-private sector partnerships that we could take advantage of to lower the cost of access?
Hello? Am I on? Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I think you're very right. In order, when we think about this whole digital aspect, private-public partnerships are going to be very, very key. And some of these that I can think of, and you just mentioned it really well. You look at subsea cables, you look at, companies just like Facebook, Google are coming up with all of these initiatives that from a private sector perspective we can actually leverage. But it's also community-led efforts like community networks, because I mean, when you think about connectivity, it's not going to just be the government and it's not going to just be the private sector, because MNOs are in the market to make money. I mean, for them at least, that's the basic thing. They are looking at their bottom lines, and so they won't be caring about every single person, especially at the very last mile, to get the connectivity. So how do we think about other alternative ways of connecting? Community networks, how do we make the environment favorable for that from a policy perspective? That also goes into, how does government make the environment favorable for community networks to thrive? Those are some of the different aspects. And then I think we can also look at examples, for instance, in Rwanda. If you think about what Rwanda is doing with Mara phones, there's a partnerships there. And they had a program whereby they were giving 1 million smartphones to Rwandan citizens. That's another way of how, the government partnered with someone who's actually, having these phones, and they decided to give this to vulnerable people who needed them. So we have to look at it in different angles, ensuring that we can also make the environment favorable to start manufacturing. I'm glad that I had from the from the last session that we had, a representative from the ministry saying that that's something they're looking at. How do we make manufacturing local? How do we ensure that we can have those partners where we can have our own manufacturing of devices, even if it's not just in Uganda, but maybe somewhere on the continent where it's much easier and much cheaper for people. And that way, we make the cost a little bit favorable, and it's not all pushed to the consumer. So there's definitely going to be government initiatives, there's going to be private sector initiatives, but also community initiatives like community networks. I think those are some of the three aspects that I can draw on right now.
Thank you so much. And you're absolutely right that there's so many examples we can borrow from. It's also important to see where have they scaled. So there's various initiatives across the continent, and we have several that we can pick from and leverage here. Now, Ele, maybe you can help us out. Yes, Diana, you want to add something real quick?
Yes, thank you. I just want to add something to what Evelyn shared. I want to mention that in addition to the handsets that you need the infrastructure set up, and that's where the biggest challenge is. When you go with your phone to the village, you find that you lose network along the way. When you look at the village people, those who even have the basic feature phones, they don't have power to charge these phones. So what am I saying? We need to have the infrastructure set up, the power system available. You can charge your phone either with solar or power near your home. You have the MNO masts available so that people are able to use these services appropriately, because we may run into a scenario where the phone manufacturers produce so many phones, but then when it comes to distribution to the people in the rural areas, they will just not work. You find you have to walk to a certain area to pick phone network. If you want to do transactions on your mobile phone, you have to stand somewhere to even pick the signal just to send mobile money from one person to another. So the infrastructure setup is very important. And once that's in place, then we can discuss price. The price can go down after the underlying infrastructure has been set up. Thank you. I just wanted to add to that.
Oh, a very important point. Thank you so much for adding that. And it's almost like you knew the direction I was going to take with my next question to Mele. Because so many times, mobile network operators are seen as these deep-pocketed entities. Actually, UNCDF has been asked in some cases, why are you working with MTN? They don't need money, $1 million company. And yet, the truth is that companies like these, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they have an interest in, yes, closing that digital divide because they have more viable customers out there. If you have more people who are able to use your services, you're making even more money. So, Mele, GSMA brings together these various MNOs. These are members of your organization. Maybe you can give us some insights. If all was well, what guidance would you give to allow these companies to sort of deploy their full capability to help close this digital divide? What are some of those things that they're not doing simply because policies are not right, spectrum is not allocated well? But if all that was done, what are some of those other things that they could do? What are you hearing from your members? Thanks.
Yeah, great question, and a lot to respond to that came up during the discussion so far. I wouldn't go so far as to say that mobile operators don't care about the last mile. I think we care a lot as an industry about connecting everyone, but we need to face the reality that, yes, we need to create the environment for the private sector to go as far as possible. We realize that in some cases we need government support, and we also need to realize some areas, and this is a very small amount of percentage, but are simply unfeasible to get covered. In terms of the access, I really like the points that you just made. I think that's also what we saw in this pilot that we did between MTN and ISAT in this rural village, is really that people are 30 to 70 kilometers away from the first point of sale where they can actually get a SIM card, top up the prepaid card. So it's really a matter of distribution as well, even when you have the infrastructure in place. I think one of the and that's maybe not only a challenge for mobile operators, but definitely also for the broader community. I think what we know very well is infrastructure. And we know very well the policies that need to be in place. We've had decades of experience of scaling these models, and actually, mobile is the technical solution that has scaled best. I like how you mentioned some of the innovations like the balloons, etc. And we're supportive of all innovation that can help. But ultimately, we see those innovations don't scale or simply not feasible. So we need to look at really those elements. So we know how to do infrastructure as a mobile industry, as the regulator, but the bigger question is around this lack of adoption. We have this 90% coverage in Uganda, and depending on if you count all people or adults, 23% is actually using that infrastructure. And that is a much more complex question to answer for the industry, but also for every other stakeholder. It is looking at digital skills, the affordability question of handsets, where we indeed see a lot of public-private partnerships, now actually a lot of governments and also other partners looking at device subsidies. So how can we actually subsidize devices? It's also something the GSMA is looking at with its members. But most important is digital skills. So apologies if I'm going back a little bit on that topic that we just discussed, but it's just so important. That's also why I'm very happy that we signed this MOU with UNCDF to focus really on digital skills in Uganda. And that is something that our mobile operator members now also start to realize and move into. It's like, how can we move our customer base that is already connected to mobile subscription, but not yet mobile internet subscriber? How can we move those up the value chain? So how can we increase digital inclusion? But also, how can we reach people who have never heard of the mobile internet? And that requires just training and preparing your market. We don't bring a product to a market anymore. It is about actually creating that market in the first place. And that is something the GSMA supports our members on. MTN is a big partner in that regard. So it has implemented we have this basic digital skills toolkit, because sometimes when we talk about skills, it's often about skills for employment, which of course is very much important because we want to create that digital ecosystem, and we need to have the employees that are able to do coding and develop these innovations and new products. But actually we must have a larger debate, especially in the policy field, around basic digital skills. And maybe from a government perspective, it seems like, oh, but then we are only creating these consumers. But you need those consumers for businesses to want actually to offer digital products and services. So it's really important that we focus on basic digital skills and literacy. Here in Uganda, MTN has implemented our mobile internet skills training toolkit. It's a mouthful, but it's just focusing on 12 modules or lessons that are about the most popular applications, so Google, YouTube, but also Wikipedia, for example, but also basic settings on online safety, or what is actually a megabyte, because that's also a new concept for a lot of people. So we need to train or help people along that path towards digital inclusion. And I think our approach has been quite successful in other markets. So far we've globally achieved 50 million people, and it shows that it can scale because the way we implement it, which was also discussed just before, is like how do we actually reach these people, and face-to-face is key here. And our mobile operator members try to link a commercial incentive for agents to training users. So we have these very small 2 to 3 minute trainings that regional MTN or Airtel or any other member offices train their sales agents on, and then the sales agents, they can train their customers. And we see a significant impact in terms of the data uptake of those users who have been trained. Some countries it's an increase of 400, 500%. So that creates also this incentive for the agent to go out there and train people, because there needs to be a mutual benefit for these to scale. I think there's a lot of good work that's been done by NGOs or public sector, but for really to reach the majority of the people, there needs to be this mutual benefit both for the consumer and for the mobile operator. So maybe a very long answer, but just a lot to cover.
No, it's a very good question, and you're absolutely right that I think we see so many initiatives that really do point to the fact that indeed mobile network operators do care about the last mile customer. And speaking of the last mile customer, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the issue of financing. So we know that in trying to close that digital divide, getting services to the last mile, many times this is done through innovators. You know, somebody comes up with a neat application that connects a bank to a rural community or a village savings group. And so I'm coming back to you at Equity Bank. So you mentioned quite a lot about the things that you've done to incorporate technology into your service offerings. But perhaps our audience online, people in the room, oh, and by the way, please let me know how we're doing on time, colleagues. Just caution me. As well as any questions coming through online, you can queue those up for us. But so regarding financing, are there, so many times we see these startups, the business models are risky. You know, somebody is offering a solution for rural communities, you don't know if it will work. Is there anything that Equity is doing in terms of financing for these innovators that are extending services to those last mile communities, or maybe even in enabling them in any way, whether it's plugging into your core banking system or making it easier for them to set up? Tell us a bit about that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris. When you go and meet anybody in this country or anywhere in the world, they will tell you about money. But money is not the end point of life. So somebody can support you in any other initiatives. At Equity, we have scalable applications interfaces, something they call APIs, whereby for any startup who's out there or is in this room, you simply come and approach Equity Bank. We assess your application and we give you an opportunity to plug into our number of customers. Equity has over 1 million customers. So once we give you that opportunity to plug in the sense of integration with the API, we are giving you an opportunity to access all our customers with your services. That is one. That is not a money sentiment, but ultimately it will be a gaining opportunity for you as a startup. Secondly, through our partners, MasterCard, and through especially to speak about what we call the Young Africa Works, we have a lot of donations through MasterCard to enhance and to equip our startups that have any innovations in Uganda, whereby Equity Bank is open to finance them through our partner MasterCard. So for any startup who's out there, just go tomorrow to any nearest bank, branch of Equity Bank, talk about your startup, we'll be able to come and finance you. And lastly, this topic for this annual symposium resonates with Equity very well. We are talking about intellectual property, and we are talking about financing. You and me don't know. Most of the banks or commercial entities are looking at collateral being land, but you know land is not elastic. You understand? At one point, or be it 500 years or 100 years, we'll be here or will not be here. Land will never be collateral anymore. So when you talk about intellectual property, those are the innovations we're talking about. Who knows that somebody out there who has come up with an app or an application as a content builder, and its own innovation becomes collateral for financing. So that's why Equity Bank has resonated with KTA and seen this opportunity to try and forge any other things that an individual can offer in the sense of collateral. So Equity is scalable as a bank. It is a good listening partnership, just as our slogan. We are here to listen into everybody, and knows that is in addition of all the financial services we offer. I've talked about a digital lending. You just be a customer, open an account, transact a few times, then you're able to apply. Or you can go through the youth applications. Equity offers youth loans. You can be with a startup. For example, you are in Masaka. You have your startup. It's in the community. It's meant to develop community members. Get yourself organized in a group, and you come to Equity Bank. Will give you the youth loans. You can churn that loan into your innovation to make more money, in addition to help you with integration or applications that can work for both ways, for our customers and for your customers. So please, Equity is available for you. Equity has an open hand for you. We will offer both initiatives, financing, and then we discuss through the future of financing and the future of money. Thank you, Chris.
Nice, thank you so much. So there's a call to action. I mean, he says he has money and APIs, and he's willing to help. And following suit, I'm going to ask all the other panel members to prepare your own call to action. Shem, I appreciate you leading us off there. Other panel members, choose your target wisely, because then you will say, all right, this is my call to action. As we end this is who I want to direct my statement to. But also, if we have any, now I don't know who's moderating, I don't know if we have any questions online, or if we want to prepare 1 to 2 questions from our physical audience, that'd be also great. And also to see how we're doing on time. But I think we're still good, no? Yeah. Okay, so you let me know if anybody has any questions. But I think we'll start with you, Evelyn. Let's, if you had a call to action, there's been so much talk of closing digital divide. And yet, so I spend a lot of time out in the field. I'm sure several of you do as well. I mean, you go to these communities and you almost start to question your mandate. It's the reality on the ground versus the dreams and expectations that we have can be so different. What would be your call to action? Who would you direct it to and say, you know what, policymaker X, do this thing and we'll be on track? Or private sector entity Y, do this thing. So I'll come to you, Evelyn, and then we'll sort of go to Mele and then to Diana. Over to you, Evelyn.
I wish they were actually in the room so I could look at them in the face and say, like, you should do this. But no, but on a serious note, I think what you said resonates with me so much, like going on the ground and seeing the reality versus what we preach. And I was having a conversation with Diana at lunch, and we're saying that, we have very polished ways of talking about the policies and everything that should actually work, but it doesn't. But my call to action is really for our, I would say legislators, for lack of a better word, just to say that we need to be intentional in what we add in some of these aspects, like the national broadband policy. What we have is for, I think, 2018. Have we been intentional to actually revise some of these documents and add specific indicators that should work? We've all been talking about device affordability. We know that's a very big issue. Do we have specific targets in there that we can measure and say, this is where we've come and this is where we are? So I feel like there's a lot missing in terms of putting really tangible targets in some of these beautiful policies that we have, but also on the implementation standpoint, being able to go to the last mile and implement these. So for me, I'll start from, I think, the regulators, because I think that's where it starts. And then I would want us to be very intentional on the policies that we have, but also put very tangible targets that we can go back and look these people in the face and say, at least now we have a rural broadband policy that actually works. I think right now we have infrastructure because we've implemented infrastructure sharing. We have all of these things in place, and then we can now build on top and start talking about the skills and the affordability. But I think it starts from the top, and I feel like we are failing from the top.
Thank you so much. And it's such a strong point about tangible targets, right? You're right, there's all this beautiful language and all that policy documents, and yet is it really realistic? Are we actually going to close that gap? Mele, over to you. What would be your call to action if we're going to close this divide?
Do you have a minute? I have like 110. No. So I'll keep it a bit shorter than that. I really like your point about the targets, and I would like to add to that evidence-based policy making, and also making sure that those targets are based on realities. And because I also spend a lot of time in kind of international fora, and there it's about, oh yeah, let's go for 100%, which is in many countries not feasible. So let's create the evidence. We have a lot of data as a GSMA from our mobile operators, so we can look at what is the trend, what is the problem, and then limit ourselves in the prioritize really the implementation that we want to do, because we cannot address everything at once. So let's be intentional, and I would say let's create also very strong implementation plans, rather than saying, oh yeah, we need digital skills for everyone. That is not tangible enough, in my opinion. We need to have implementation plans.
Thank you so much for that. And I think another really important point coming out of there is, yeah, make it evidence-based. You know, there's so much data out there, especially now in the age of digitalization, and yet we continue to have so many underserved communities, and yet we're not really leveraging the data coming out of this usage. Diana, what's your take? Who would you target your call to action to?
My call to action will be targeted to the regulators and the policymakers. We've seen that over the last few years, you've seen so many financial technology products coming up, business models, services, and so there's a lot of innovation that is happening in the financial technology space. And with all these innovations, you find that it's hard for the regulator to cope up, and it will be difficult for them to supervise or regulate a service which they don't understand. So my call to action is to the regulators in the digital finance ecosystem, to the UCCs of this world, the Bank of Uganda, NIRA, NITA, name it, to have regulators get skilled in understanding this financial technology, understanding the digital finance, how it works, all the products that the fintechs are trying to roll out. That way, when the regulators get to understand these products, then they'll have effective supervision and also be able to support up to the last mile, understand where the gaps are, see how to close the different risks that come through, and then we will be able to close the divide. So my call to action is about skilling. I know that some regulators, policymakers have gotten these skills, but it's not enough. We need to deepen and get more of them on board so that we can be able to have this impact and close that divide in the area of literacy, as well as effectively supervise and regulate these products that are going out into the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's such an important point about, you know, regulators getting skilled on these policies, on these aspects. There's a story I tell, but it's not my story. Somebody else told it to me at the Financial Technology Services Providers Association conference, and they said they were talking to somebody in the Ministry of ICT, and this person took them aside and said, "What's fintech?" And you know, they are they are in this industry. This is somebody who you think would know, but they were being honest. What's fintech? You know, tell me so I can then tell you what rules you should follow. And so it's a very important point. Shem, you led us off with the calls to action, so I followed your lead, but if you have anything to add, this would be the time to do it and get those customers in the door.
All right. Thank you, Chris. I know everybody is on the panel is bouncing on the government and to the regulators. I want to deviate a little bit, and my call for action is two-faceted. First, I'll take a two-pronged approach. One is the government or developmental partners to government, and these include financial institutions, multinational enterprises, and also other stakeholders in government. We need to come up and come with our strategies or board regulations. When we sit in the boardrooms, let us come with strategies that also help government to come to call to action. What do I mean? If a multinational like Coca-Cola, like MTN, when you come and you try to bring governance, talk about governance and leadership, please try to emulate, put leadership courses, put leadership institutions for the local people also to learn how you behave, how you transact, how you've been able to maintain your organization. So in that sense, you're helping out the government also to work and achieve its goals. I know of human capacity development. I know government has come up with so many initiatives. And this time around, Chris, allow me to talk like a politician or like a government worker. But government has done a lot of initiatives. UPE, educated so many people, have come up with regulations, but also multinationals and development partners should come and help in human capacity development to close the literacy gap, which is 19%, and try to bring it around 70% or sorts, so that everybody in the country is happy. And finally, to the youth out there, I know in Uganda we're so fresh, stabbed fresh with the law. So many young boys out there misusing this gadget called the phone. The phone can do a lot for you. If everybody can preach out the gospel out there, this phone we use, other than abusing people or more forwarding messages, funny messages, you can use the phone the more and the more. And I want to call upon the youth that the future is for the organized, especially if you are an organized entity, you'll be good. If you save now in your youthful age, the future is very bright for you. Banks world over need organized people. They need people organized. They'll be able to get cheap collateral when you're very organized. And once you save and as an organized entity, that means you'll have, after 1 year, one to spend. For example, there are interest funding accounts, the savings account you can open as an individual. Don't be in your home, use a phone to abuse your neighbor, to do this, because I don't like this, let me be funny. But use the phone productively, and please, the future is very, very healthy for the organized people. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you so much, Shem. And it's such a good point, too, that indeed we all have a role to play in this, right? So development partners, private sector, public sector, civil society. And there's also this, I think you touch on a strong mindset change, that indeed, as we try to talk about the digital divide or the reality on the ground versus the expectations, indeed, there are also several deeply embedded cultural and social issues that do hold us back. So there's education on that level and mindset change that needs to happen. I do not think that we had any questions online. And I also know that ours was a very, very efficient panel. So I'd like to thank our colleagues on the panel so much. So unless there are any questions from our physical audience, I would like to call this to a close and to thank you all so much for your contributions. I think it's been a lovely conversation. Yes, we do have one question from the audience. I don't know if there's a mic that we can take around, or you can borrow this one.
This one here.
All right, there's the mic. She wants to come up front. Yeah, so the cameras can see you. Is it on?
Okay. Thank you, our distinguished panel. Thank you, moderator. Mine is to Shem. I'm just wondering how you reconcile the trade-off of APIs, you know, customer information with, how do you reconcile that with their privacy, their data, how do you protect their data?
Okay, the customer information on API and the data privacy, everybody knows that Uganda UCU, Uganda Communication Authority, came up with regulations and in conjunction with the Bank of Uganda on data piracy and data protection. So every commercial bank is mandated to be an appendix of the regulations. So every system or every integration system must have a secure channel through which data is protected, data protectionism, and data covenants. Literally, for a layman, the non-disclosure agreement serves that, but that is the one you see here, but in the background, system background, there's a lot of data protection. So for any integration exchange or data customer information exchange, just be 100% sure that there's a lot of data protection. So there's a lot of governance that goes into an integration process and a lot of data protection. But for a layman and an onlooker, you do a non-disclosure agreement, but in the background, there is a lot of synchronization in terms of data security. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And it's a really important point, too, that many times as we push for closing of the digital divide, we forget that, yes, including everyone also means that you're exposing everybody's data to some danger out there. And it's important to note that it's also a good thing that as we educate, so as we build the skills of underserved communities, we also build their knowledge on what their rights are as individuals who are using these platforms. The National IT Authority has what's called a Personal Data Protection Office. And they've built a platform with the support of UNCDF where, as a data subject, you know, you are able to see, is there a website where your data is being displayed, where you haven't given consent? Is there a provider who is making your data publicly viewable without your consent? And you can report this and have that followed up. So there is also an increased awareness. It was such a good point about it's very easy to harp on government and policymakers, but running a country is hard. And so there's been so many initiatives that have been taken on, including this one that I'm mentioning, really to try to make sure that citizens' data is protected from abuse. And so, very important point, indeed, a major consideration. So not just closing the digital divide, but also making sure that the privacy of our citizens is also protected. Once again, I'd like to thank our panel for their comments, for their contributions. I'd like to thank our audience, both physical and online, for your time. And I'd like to have us give the panel a big round of applause. And colleagues, please feel free to join the panel upstairs. I understand they're not as efficient as we were. So let's go ahead and see what they have to say. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Before we leave, on top of us going back up there for the other session that's still going on, we're going to have a masterclass where URSP is taking us through trademarks as a tool of brand protection. So once that session is done, when it's completely done, considering we've finished our part, we'll join them, they will conclude, and then we'll have the masterclass. So we're going for two things now. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you, Evelyn.
Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everyone. How about now? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this masterclass, which will be discussing trademarks as... Sorry about that. So this masterclass is the last session that we are having for today's program. And the masterclass will be discussing trademarks as a tool for branding. During the pandemic, or even generally, if you think back, a few years ago, there have been so many songs that have come out. Okay, there's a song, a tune that might resonate with most people of a certain generation. A song by Ruga, that goes, "Bad man looking good."
Recording stopped.
So you probably heard that song by Ruga, "Bad Man Looking Good in Dior," or you've listened to songs, that say, that mention certain brands that you might be aware of. But today's masterclass is going to focus on how we can use, what you call those brands or those names or those trademarks or the logos that you very easily identify with, and even those that you don't identify with, and how you can use those for branding in the different businesses that one may choose to undertake. So today we are very honored and humbled to have our sisters and brothers from our sister law firms, KTA sister law firms across the region. We have Gikera Vadgama from Kenya, we have Mawala Advocates from Tanzania, and we also have KO Associates LLP. Today's panel is comprised of Joy, Wilbard, Wilson, Hope, and Victor. Shortly, I'm going to just read to you the brief profiles of some of the presenters we're going to have for this masterclass. I will start with Joy. Joy is a senior associate at Gikera Vadgama Advocates in Kenya. Her primary area of focus is dispute resolution in fields including civil and commercial litigation, intellectual property, technology, employment law, estate planning, insurance, and professional negligence law. She has advised on various multinational as well as local entities on a wide range of legal areas and has represented clients at arbitral and quasi-tribunals, courts including the Court of Appeal and the court mandated mediation. She holds a Bachelor of Laws with honors degree from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa and a postgraduate diploma from the Kenya School of Law. She's a member of the Law Society of Kenya and the East African Law Society. I'd also like to introduce to you Wilson Wahome. Wilson is an associate in the Intellectual Property and Anti-Counterfeit Department of GVA, Gikera Vadgama. He is an associate specializing in the areas of technology and intellectual property. He has a background in a variety of cross-cutting issues that touch on telecommunications law, media law, data protection, and privacy. We also have Victor Mutui, who is a legal associate in the technology and intellectual property practice area at KO Associates LLP. His practice focuses on technology, telecommunications, and media transactions, intellectual property,
protection and advisory, competition regulation, privacy compliance, and payment regulation. Victor is part of a multidisciplinary team focusing on finance, mergers and acquisitions, policy and regulatory advisory, and dispute resolution. He has been involved in different phases of intellectual property transactions. I would like to now take us over to the presentation, or rather to the masterclass, that is going to be first led by Joy. So Joy, over to you. Just to mention, they will be sharing their screen. So if we could enable that so we all see the presentation. Thank you.
Bonita, I'm still waiting to be allowed to share my screen.
All right, let's fix that right away.
But I will assume there are many of you looking back at me. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank KTA for allowing us to be part of this symposium. There's been a lot of learning on my part from morning, and I hope the same applies to all of us. Unfortunately, the bad thing about coming last in a day's symposium is that people are tired and are in a rush to go home. And so I will not take too much of your time. I will try to be brief. Our topic, together with my co-panelists, is trademarks as a tool for branding. I will just take the introduction part, and then I will usher in my colleague, Wilson, who will take us through registration of trademarks, as well as how to identify a trademark. I will then usher in another colleague, Victor, who will speak to us about the benefits of registering your mark. And then we will have Wilbert coming in last to share with us trademarks in the technology space. Great, so it has been said that trademarks are to your business what your name is to you. Trademarks are what identify your business to your customers. No amount of money can get you a better Coca-Cola than you would at your local kiosk. In fact, I dare say that the taste of Coca-Cola in Uganda will be the same as Coca-Cola
in progress,
or Tanzania or Burundi. And that is what a trademark is. It assures consumers all over of the quality of brand that they are taking. So what is a trademark? Because we are discussing trademarks, and I will not bore you too much with details because I know we've had, or at least come across, the term trademarks before. So a trademark is a unique design, a name, a sign, symbol, word, or combination of all these employed in creating an image that identifies a product and differentiates it from its competitors. So it could be a design, a symbol, a name, or a word, or many of these combined together to form a unique mark or symbol that would identify a certain product and differentiate it from others in the market. Like I mentioned while beginning, a trademark represents quality, credibility, and satisfaction in a consumer's mind. When I go to pick a Coca-Cola from a supermarket, I am assured, because this is Coca-Cola, we know Coca-Cola, so I'm assured of its quality, I'm assured of its credibility and satisfaction in my mind as I pick it in a supermarket. That is what will make me go for Coca-Cola instead of another drink, because I am assured of the quality or the brand that is Coca-Cola. It's also a promise that helps consumers in their buying process. So your trademark is what will make a consumer pick your product over products of others in the same market. Lastly, it represents the most valuable, intangible asset that a company possesses. That's why I began by saying a trademark is to your business what your name is to you. The same way your name represents who you are, your trademark represents your company or your brand. What is the genesis of trademarks? So what's the history of trademarks? Because we've defined what a trademark is, but where did all this come from? In my reading, I found that trademarks, the word trademark or brand first came into being in the olden days of shepherds or cattle herders who would mark their cattle by, say, stamping using a hot iron or cutting marks on the ears of their cattle to differentiate them from those of other herders. And this was important because all of them would go to herd in the same place. And so one herder needed to differentiate his herd from that of others. And so they would mark them in a specific way to be able to link them to the particular herder. This is especially common within the Maasai community in Kenya. I do not know about Uganda, but I would imagine even the herders in Uganda and Tanzania and Burundi and whichever country would want to somehow mark their cattle or sheep or goat to differentiate it from others. Then came Industrial Revolution, and the marking was brought into other goods. So manufacturers of goods would mark the goods in a specific way to be able to tell consumers that those goods came from them. So initially, trademarks were a mark of origin to show consumers these goods originated from a particular source. That then evolved to show quality. So manufacturers of goods would use a particular mark to show consumers that they can trust this brand, they can trust this quality because it came from me. Again, I will go to my example of Coca-Cola. But to bring this even home, some of the popular marks within Uganda, Jumia, you hear Jumia and you can relate to what this is. The moment you see a Jumia mark, you can relate to what that is. Another mark that is popular within Uganda. Sorry, I need to reference my notes because in Kenya we have Nice, which I've seen is a popular mark within Uganda as well. And various marks, so you can link a particular mark to a particular source. And that creates comfort within a consumer's mind while purchasing those goods. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what a trademark does for your business. So we have seen the evolution of trademarks from herders to manufacturers of goods. And so where are we now with trademarks? Where are we now? Trademarks have evolved to become a tool which helps consumers to identify and purchase a product or service based on its specific characteristics and qualities, and helps them to find and meet their needs. So your mark is what will make a consumer go to a supermarket and pick that particular item as opposed to others in the supermarket. And so now that we know what trademarks are and how what they cause consumers to do, which is purchase your item or your service as opposed to others, is there a need to register your mark? Is there a need to register your trademark? And how do you even identify what mark to register? How do I come up with a unique mark that will make me stand out in the market? I promised not to bore you with details. I promised to be brief, and so I will usher in my colleague Wilson, who will take us through how to identify a mark and how to make it unique to be able to have it registered by the various registration bodies within our countries and even globally. So Wilson, please come in and take us through registration of trademarks and how to identify a trademark. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joy. And I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Joy has given us a very good overview of the origin of trademarks, and I would wish very quickly to jump straight into how we can go about the process of selecting or identifying a trademark. And I believe Joy also touched a bit on what a trademark is or how a trademark can be defined. And it includes so many things or so many components. A trademark could be a name, could be a symbol, could be a logo, and sometimes trademarks have even extended to scents. So how do you go about selecting this particular trademark that will help you enjoy a sense of or some uniqueness associated with either your product or your service? One of the key things that you definitely need to do is ensure that your trademark is distinct. So you don't want something that is commonplace or that everybody else has. It is by virtue of having a distinct or a unique trademark that then you get to enjoy the benefits of having that particular trademark. So there are a few do's and a few don'ts on how you go about registering a trademark. The first don't, or what you do not want to do when you're selecting a trademark, is you don't want to be generic. And in the strict sense of the word, if something is generic, then it is what the public understands to be common, or the common name of a product or a service. So by way of example, we could go with a common name such as clocks. If you are a manufacturer of watches or timepieces, then you don't want your company name to be Clocks Limited. And that is simply because the name Clocks is fairly common and you'll probably not enjoy the use of that particular name. And the example would probably be something like detergents, because in most places, in Kenya anyway, I don't know about Uganda and the rest of the jurisdictions, but in Kenya, most people take detergents to mean soap. So if you are a soap manufacturer and everything that you're producing, you're calling detergent or you're giving a very commonplace name, then probably you won't have that sense or that element of uniqueness. The other problem about having words, logos, or generally a trademark that is generic or commonplace is that they can never be appropriated by one party. So typically, in most jurisdictions, and again, I'll refer to Kenya because Kenya is my home country and it's where I'm most familiar with. What will happen is that once you go to the trademark registrar, they'll ask you to do what we call disclaim. So disclaiming simply means that because this word is too common, you cannot have exclusive ownership of that particular, whether it's a name, whether it's a logo, whether it's a mark. They will disallow it. They can tell you that, fine, you can go ahead and use the word clock or detergent or whichever other commonplace name exists, but you cannot appropriate it. And since that then allows other people to come up and use the same name, then you lose the element of uniqueness. Something else that you don't want to do is you also do not want to be descriptive. So if a mark is descriptive, then as the word suggests, it describes what your product is or what your service is. For most people, they'll choose to go with descriptive because it is very basic and very straightforward. By way of example, if, say, for instance, you are a seller of ice cream and you call your company or your product Cold and Creamy, it then describes to the public what this particular thing is. If it's a product again, and it's called Cold and Creamy for ice cream, it just gives it away. And again, you lose that element of uniqueness or that element of surprise when it comes to having people know what your mark or what your company or what your good is all about. Something else could be, personally, I am a lawyer, and if you went about calling your legal practice law firm associates, then it loses again that element of uniqueness. So you don't want to be descriptive when you are choosing a trademark. Now, you moving on to the spectrum of uniqueness, what you can be is you can be suggestive. So suggestive sort of falls in the midway point of what you can do or what you cannot do when it comes to registration of trademarks. So a suggestive mark gives the consumers an idea of what the business does or what it is about. So the thing about suggestive marks is that they require some imagination on the part of consumer to connect to the goods or the services. So a very popular suggestive mark would be Netflix, and Netflix again requires some imagination on your end. So net is just the short form of internet, and flix is slang for movies. So if you combine the two words, it gives you movies from the internet, which again is combined to come up with the name Netflix. Again, another example would be a company such as Airbus, and again, Airbus requires a bit of imagination on the part of the consumer, and this is because Airbus is a company that is well known for producing airplanes. So on to the do's. What do you want to do when you are selecting? Now, what marks enjoy the strongest protection when you are going, whether it's to the trademark registrar in Kenya, whether it's in Uganda, or wherever else across the world? If your mark is arbitrary, you want to be arbitrary when you're selecting your mark. So arbitrary marks literally have no correlation between the name of the product or the service as well as what it does. So a very good and very popular example would be Apple. So when Apple settled on their name, if you tell somebody that or if they told somebody that Apple was going to be a manufacturer for computers and phones, then they would never have linked the two. And so that again gives it an element of uniqueness. So you want to be arbitral and as arbitral as you can when selecting a mark. But the category of marks that enjoy the strongest protection are what we call fanciful. So fanciful marks are typically just made up words. And these made up words, again, they do not exist, and that just shoots them up higher up in the uniqueness spectrum. So by way of example, if you are being fanciful, most people, what they tend to do, what I have seen in Kenya, is that if, say, for instance, a business belongs, say, to a couple, what the couple will do is that they'll take, say, a portion of one person's name and a portion of the second person's name, and they'll put them together. Again, that's just aimed at making your product, your good, or your service as unique as possible. Sometimes you might even come up with a made-up word. And very, very good examples of made-up words which are quite popular are Google. So when Google was coming up with the name Google, no one probably had ever heard of that word. Again, Kodak, which was a very popular company who are manufacturers of photographic material, and even ExxonMobil, who are an oil company. Those are just examples of fanciful marks and which receive the strongest elements, the strongest trademark protection. So I think we've sorted out the issue of screen sharing, and I would request maybe if the presenter can just go to, this is slide number 9, just to show the spectrum of inherent distinctiveness, and where or what forms of marks receive the strongest and which ones receive the weakest protection. So remember, we've moved all the way from generic marks to descriptive to suggestive to arbitral and lastly fanciful. So whenever you are selecting a mark, remember that is a sort of spectrum of choosing your mark. And always remember that if you choose a generic mark, it will enjoy the least protection, and sometimes it may not enjoy protection at all. You might have difficulty in having the mark registered. But if you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is fanciful, then that just means that you have a made-up word which does not exist and which is very, very unique. And so you are most likely, or you are more likely to enjoy trademark protection if you go with a mark that is fanciful. So very quickly, so how do you, as an entrepreneur, as a business, even as an individual, how do you, when you're going to register at the trademark registrar or whichever relevant office is responsible for registration of trademarks, so how do you settle on, because not everybody can, if you want to register trademarks, you can't just register them how you please. There's a certain way that trademarks are registered, and this is by way of categorization. So I won't bore you with too much legalese. All I like to say on the issue of trademark classes or categorization is that there is a class categorization that is referred to as the NIS classification. So the NIS classification has about 45 categories, which just allow entrepreneurs, businesses, and individuals to select which category they'd want to be registered under. So remember, because you might find that, trademark, there are about 8 billion people in the world, and there's a very high likelihood that I might think of a trademark, or I might come up with a name that another person will then come up with. However, you might find that our businesses exist across different spectrums. So by way of example, I might exist in the road construction industry, and another individual might exist in the hotel industry. So it would not be fair for both of us to be registered in the same category, because his business and my business operate in entirely different fields. So what the NIS classification does is that it allows entrepreneurs, individuals, and businesses to just sort of select which class they'd want their trademark to be registered under, and where they can then enjoy the highest form of protection, so that you don't have people or businesses overlapping, and people claiming that somebody, say from the road industry or from whichever other type of business, is taking up customers from an entirely different business. Remember that the essence of registering trademarks is just to give your consumers, to give your business or your products legitimacy. And so it's very difficult that if an individual uses product X from a certain line of business, that he will then be confused when it's an entirely different line of business. So this is basically what the trademark classes do for you. And I'd recommend that before you can select the classes, if you can seek the services of a lawyer who will just help you break down and recommend which are the most relevant classes. Obviously, you can go ahead and look at the 45 classes and just look to see which class is relevant to your business, but it would also help that if you got the assistance of an advocate or of a lawyer. And maybe just as I wrap up, I'd want to say that trademark registration is possible to do both locally and internationally. So locally, we have the different laws that are relevant, that are used in the registration of trademarks. There is a basic process of how to register trademarks, and although the registration process might vary somewhat, the basic procedure is the same. So where you start with your search, and what the search intends to do is just to ensure that no one else has an existing mark. From the search, once you get the search results, you then proceed to do your registration, or rather your application for registration. From then on, once the trademark registrar has given a substantive examination report telling you that, by the way, this trademark is good to go, or you need to, if it's a generic mark, then you need to disclaim certain words or certain colors, because even colors cannot be appropriated by any individual. Then you need to disclaim the use of those colors. From then on, in most places, what happens is that after that process, you also be required to advertise that mark, so that if any individual or any entity needs to raise a complaint and say that, by the way, this individual looks or wants to register a mark that is similar to mine, then they have the opportunity to register that mark. But if it passes the advertisement stage and there is no objection whatsoever, then it proceeds to be registered, and it is at that stage that you get your registration certificate. But that is on a local scale. On a global scale, there are all these treaties and protocols that exist, but one of the most popular protocol, if you want to register a trademark globally, is the Madrid Protocol. So in most instances, you'll typically tend to use your local office just to register the mark worldwide, and using the Madrid Protocol, where it will then be subjected to scrutiny and interrogation in each of the countries that you've selected to register the mark in. And I think I'll stop at that, and back to Joy. I don't know if she's still on the call.
Wilson, thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite Victor, who will take us through the advantages and maybe even highlight whether there are any disadvantages with registering a trademark. Karibu sana, Victor.
Thank you for the introduction, George. If you could still share the screen, because I think if I share it from my end, it will take some time. But I can start off. So I will take you through how you can use the mark to ensure that you protect your business, and more specifically, how marks are used by various businesses to ensure that they tap into the market and get most out of their brand, which is protected through a mark. So, for instance, looking at Uganda, one of the top brands is the Mukwano brand, the oil, which you will be able to differentiate it from any other oil in the market if you saw it in the shelves, because of how it's branded, the colors which are used for that particular product, and also the story behind how that mark is. So basically, marks are used, one, to build a brand of a business, which would normally start from the time of the incorporation of the company. So for instance, if it's Mukwano, the oil brand, you would also find that they have also protected the name with the company's registrar through
recording in progress,
through registration of the Mukwano name, so Mukwano Company Limited, or any other company that might also want to protect their trade name through that would want to protect their trade name through registration with the company's registrar as the name which they will be trading in. Also, you can use the mark to recognize a particular brand in the market. So as I had said, when you go to the shelf in the supermarket, you will be able to know that that is a Mukwano brand just because of how it is and also how it is presented in the product. So for instance, you'll find it's a green bottle which has now a logo which is indicated Mukwano, and also there's that seed oil brand still owned by Mukwano, but now it would look different from how the normal Mukwano vegetable oil can would look like. So to go that, there are various statutory benefits. If you could go to slide number 28, kindly. There are various statutory benefits that one will get from registering their mark. So the first one is that the owner of the mark will have the exclusive use of that mark in the market. So basically, using the example of the Mukwano brand, there is no any other company which would come and sell same goods or identical goods in the market which bear the name Mukwano, because it is an already protected brand. So they use that to protect their market and ensure that no one would infringe into their intellectual property. Now, which in this case, the mark, by offering goods in the market, which now would be confusing to the consumer and think that they are purchasing the Mukwano vegetable oil, while in the real sense, they are purchasing some other vegetable oil. So the other statutory benefit of having your mark registered is that you will have some form of recourse in any case someone uses your brand without the requisite authorization. So in any case, there's any other now company which comes in with another good which looks like Mukwano goods and offers it for sale in the market without having the authorization of Mukwano, then now Mukwano can go to court and claim that this particular entity or this particular person has infringed on my brand, and therefore I am entitled to seek damages in form of either money or these people might also be told that now you cannot use that brand, or also you can account, also you're supposed to account for all the income which you've gained from passing off Mukwano's brand. Also, when you have your mark registered, you can also license it for some form of commercial benefit. So for instance, if I own a brand A, which is protected by the name A, and then I license it to another entity to use it, then I will be able to derive some commercial benefit from that. And then when you have your TM protected in one place, or where you have your TM having some global neutrality, then you're able to also have it protected in other jurisdictions without really having to go through the hassle of having to show how distinct it is and other aspects. So with that, then I will also now go specifically into like what advantages will you have when you register a brand. So a brand, I will still use the example of Mukwano. So a brand will ensure that a particular entity's goods or services are well protected in that market, and the market will always relate to that particular brand. For instance, Joy, when she started the presentation, she gave an example of Coca-Cola. There's no way you would, if you're a Coca-Cola customer and you see the Coca-Cola drink somewhere, you will automatically know that this is a Coca-Cola drink and it's the drink that I like, and therefore I have to buy it because this is what I want. Now, it would have been a different case if all the Coca-Cola drinks were not branded. You wouldn't know which drink is this, even if you go to another foreign jurisdiction, and therefore this shows the importance of having your brand registered and how it resonates to the market. There's also the issue of brand, having your mark protected also ensures that there's healthy competition in the market. So why competition is important is because it helps in market growth. So in any case, we did not have entities protecting their brands, then it would mean that people will free ride on other people's innovation, and therefore there will be no that incentive for an entity to ensure that it innovates for the growth of the market. Also, branding helps in cushioning an entity against counterfeits. So for instance, where there's a well-defined brand of Mukwano, it means that I, as now a third party, cannot bring in another good in the market now which looks the same, because I know that that will be a counterfeit good, and therefore I might actually be exposing myself to various legal issues because I am counterfeiting a good which is already in the market, and there are laws which prohibit counterfeit goods, which seek to distort the market because if I am able to get a good of a particular brand cheaply, then it means the owner of that brand is not getting the commercial value, which is one, unethical, and also it's illegal under various regulatory regimes. I have talked about how you can use a brand to ensure there's a proper entity reputation protection. And yeah, so there are also now there are also disadvantages that are associated with having your brand protected through the registration of your mark. If you recall, one of the issues around why most African states were not able to get the COVID vaccine was because of intellectual property issues. So some entities, even though they have these life-saving goods, goods, they might not be willing to share them with other entities because they think that because I have already protected my brand, which took me time to build, I did this, version which had some economic implication on it, then it means if I have to share with you my brand, you have to pay me in terms of, so this can be done either in terms of a trademark licensing agreement or a trademark assignment agreement or sole agreements where you only enter into partnership with entities who are able to pay you for the innovation which you have done in a particular area. So in as much as they ensure that the goods of a particular entity are protected, they might also have an impact where these goods are to be used to offer some good to the public in terms of, so for instance, if you look at the issue of the COVID-19 vaccine, we all had an interest in it. We all required it for us to be safe from the pandemic. But because of now the intellectual property rights, then we had to ensure that, so I will use the example of Pfizer. So they had to ensure that for those who had this vaccine, they had to pay for it. Now this slowed down the health recovery issues, which were supposed to now be fulfilled by that vaccine because of the intellectual property issues. So therefore, in as much as it allows us to protect our brand in the market, I think it should be limited only to the extent of gaining commercial value. But now when it goes now outside that, it should also be used to promote public good, which is one of the issues that now it seeks to regulate. If I can take the presentation back to Joy.
Thank you very much, Victor. Now we know that there's a need for us to register our marks, or at least I hope with that we appreciate the need to register a mark. Maybe just to bring it home, those of us in Uganda have had or at least come across the Intel versus Intel case, where there was a battle around the name Intel, and the court had to interrogate whether this company incorporated in Uganda dealing with computer repairs was infringing in the intellectual property right of Intel Corporation that was registered abroad. The court did interrogate this in great length. Well, we as lawyers are on the fence as regards the determination of the court in that matter, because some people believe that the court might have misdirected itself in specifically the aspect of whether there's confusion in the market or whether the use of Intel in Uganda and come very close home. Or maybe another example that might ring a bell some of us is Coachella. So Coachella is an American company that organizes events. And so a company sorry about that. So a company in Ghana incorporated its own events planning company and named it Afrochella. And there's a war in court right now with Coachella saying the name Afrochella is very close to its Coachella and might cause confusion in the market. So if you want to avoid this confusion in the market, it might be good for you to register your mark, because then you're able to protect it from anyone who's trying to incorporate something very close to you as that might cause confusion in the market. Now, our last presenter will be taking us through trademarks in the digital space. I mean, we are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, so we have to link trademarks to the digital space. Wilbert, are you on the call to take us through that aspect? Welcome.
Hello, Joy.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Wilbert.
Yeah, okay. Now, as my lady sister said, I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, so as my lady sister previously said, I'll be leading you through trademarks as a tool for brand protection in the digital economy. Now, as we might know very much, the digital economy is entirely different from the brick and mortar economy. And brick and mortar, you could simply sue someone in the court of your original jurisdiction, obtain restraint orders, get an order for impoundment of counterfeit goods, and use all sorts of other physical means to restrain someone from infringing your trademarks. But digital economy is entirely a different domain, and in this there are various aspects which can particularly help someone, which cannot necessarily be used in the physical world. Now, I will not go through the introduction parts and the key terms, as I believe much has been said in terms of the actual meaning of trademark, and the brand itself has been elaborated at length with my predecessors, my lady brother Wahame and Peter and Joy as well. And therefore, I will simply go straight to the fourth industrial economy as a key term. Joy, if you can take me to that presentation, please. So basically, when we are talking of the fourth industrial revolution, we are talking of merging technology with the physical infrastructure in provision of services to humans. Provision of services is now being done online through the digital economy. Now, so much is being done, and now, as it is said, the fourth industrial, more than 3% of the global GDP is generated from the services which are being offered online. We are talking of online marketing platforms, the various ecosystems, including other digital-related services. Now, how can someone actually protect or ensure their brand is protected in the digital world? So the first mostly important aspect and the mostly criteria is registration. Now, registration has been said, has been spoken about in the previous by my lady colleagues, the importances, but before you can actually enforce or claim a trademark is being infringed online, which in most cases is linked with the domain names which are used in offering services online. The most important place to begin with is the fact that you have registered your mark. The registration will give you a ground footing on launching, from which you can launch separate claims against all potential infringers online. Now, as is said in this decision, which appears on your screen at this moment, a sense of trademark, even in the digital world, is to ensure that the fair trade, that people are trading fairly. the source. No one is taking advantage of someone else's reputation, someone else's brand, someone else's hard-earned labor, hard-earned reputation. And now to ensure this, of course, we have things, people have come up with the domain names. Now, domain names technically are like identification, but in a digital world, like a phone number, but in a digital world, specific assigned to a specific person, a company, a brand name, a product, or anything, from which they can actually offer services and goods through online. Now, in the trademarks, which are actually also domain names, how now can we
Joy, it appears we've lost Wilbard.
you guys for a minute, apologies.
Can you hear us, Wilbard? Wilbard, could you turn off your video? Hello, Joy, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I can hear you clearly.
All right, I guess Wilbard is having some technical difficulties.
Okay. I don't know if we go on with his presentation, that might throw him off. If he's not back in a few minutes, then I can take over and just wrap up.
All right, let's give it maybe 3 minutes.
All right.
Thanks.
Hello?
Yes, Wilbard.
It's actually Wilson. I think in the interest of time, we might probably just need to wrap up on Wilbard's behalf, although obviously I believe he would have been best placed to conclude, but I think he's having problems with his connection. So I'd just like to touch on two things so that we can wrap up.
Sorry, Wilson, just a moment. He says he's back but cannot see us.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Hello, Joy. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, we can, Wilbard.
Okay. All right. Apologies. I think I had a technical challenges here a little. But can you put me back to the presentation, please? The next page after that one. Yeah. So now I wanted to. I was mentioning on the very first aspect of what that will help you leverage the protection you have in trademark against your dominance in digital world is actually obtaining a registration. Now, the first registration will perform various assistances, but of the most important actually is it will actually show the origin of the things and services and goods you are selling online. It actually guarantees your customers that the quality which they have known your goods or services to be, that they will be the same, and it also create an investment advantage over you, because you can actually license, you can assign your rights to someone else and make funds of it. Now, I'm to the next aspect. How exactly are the requirements helping a brand presence in a digital world? If you see the requirements for registration, one of them is actually the brand of the scheme of things in registration requirements encourages against creating a common brand names. It actually encourages creation of a strong trademark which stands out from the rest and enable to distinguish you and your services and goods you're offering from those of your competitors. So the identification function and all the requirements for, can you take me to the next slide, please? Joey, the next one after that one. Yeah, so prohibition or things like prohibitions which are contained in registration will assist you to forge a strong brand. For example, trademark forbids you to register deceiving marks. Deceiving marks, when you have a strong brand presence in a digital universe offering services or goods, and it is not intending to deceive, you actually stand out from the rest of your competitors, but you are also sidelined from potential disputes from other online providers of services as well as goods. Now we had different cases here in Tanzania, for example, an owner of a domain name was prevented from using it as a trademark here in Tanzania because somebody else was already owning the brand in another country, even though the domain name was not registered here, but the registration was held malicious because the presence of the domain name online and the website, which had been online for several years, could prevent even potential trademark owners from registering here in Tanzania. Now, there are various other aspects of trademark which will also assist your brand in online in the digital world, and this includes the color claim. If you claim color, you create a distinct mark. And when you lodge a complaint in a domain for a different domain name, you could actually have used these aspects to your advantage to claim a takedown of a certain website, or even a certain product or an app in an ecosystem, things like Play Store and Google Store. So there are other aspects of trademark as well. We have permission to register series of marks. A series of marks will actually assist you to register in various appearances, shapes, and colors of the same mark, but in one go as one application. Another aspect that will assist you in protecting your brand in a digital economy is actually the aspect of using the priority claim. Priority claim will essentially give you a protection in advance. You will end up getting a protection in advance. Now for Kenya, I think they have this. You can use 6 months if you have registered your trademark prior to 6 months. You can still obtain the very first date of your registration in a country which they have a bilateral arrangement or belonging to a convention. For example, here in Tanzania, we have a certain convention where the member states could actually claim the date of registration in their original country as their country. Now, this will give you a presence before you are actually available in that market. And therefore, it also assists, it also reinforces your presence in the digital universe, in the digital economy. Now, things like, if you look at things also, apart from priority claim, you can also observe other aspects of trademark which can help your brand in the digital economy. We have licensing, because definitely you might have a good start, a good product, a good service, but you might not have funds to be in all places at one time. Now, there are several trademark laws which permits, if the service or good is in actual need, somebody else can step up and fill the gate. But licensing will enable you to share your invention with someone else and expand your market and the presence online in countries that you could not actually access otherwise. So there's also that one aspect. But now there are other non-legal means in which you could actually use in protecting your trademark in our digital economy. And one of them, first, you will have to set a certain amount to invest in advertisement. Now, advertisement in a digital economy is very essential. It will provide a good number of traffic to your website, to your products, and will boost your online presence and dominance, creating a more solid platform for you to claim ownership of a particular brand. So advertisement is a very essential component as well, but also vigilance. You have to be vigilant. You have to look for cyber squatters and typo squatters. Now, you may find that online, actually, people are using your brand, but they have altered a few words. They have altered a few marks, or they have actually edited just a few symbols, but created an exact domain name containing your trademark as well. You might find things like Pil Deire, they'll write Pil Daisy, or Koseke, they'll write Koseki. These are called the cyber squatters and cyber typos. But then, but if you can actually prevent this from happening. You might need to register your trademark when you are using it as a domain name as well, to register it in various domain names, using different domains. You could use, let's say, koseke.org, You could use koseke.com. You could use koseke.net. You could also use Koseki. You may purposely misspell your trademark just to ward off as a great potential number of cyber squatters and typo squatters as much as you can. But then make it a habit, if you are a trademark owner, to once in a while search and visit various databases and the international platforms. We have, for example, ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Here you can actually have access all the trademarks, all the trademarks which are also being used as domain names. You can access all the domain names there. You can see which ones is close to you, when was it registered. You can actually even lodge a claim for its claim at WIPO, because they have enforcement mechanism for claims concerning domain names. Then I've also shared the link there, which can be available for checking out things like that. But then if you are also offering services in, let's say, an ecosystems-based online marketing on a giant market like, let's say we are talking of things like eBay and Amazon. If you are offering services and goods as well, you might need to use the available means which they normally have, the IP policies of that particular platform, to launch and register your brand. The Amazon, they have the services, you can actually register your brand, and this will give you not only an access to potential infringers, but also you get a tool that will alert you in case of any people who are using a brand which is close to yours or is similar to yours, and therefore you can ward off all your competitors. But you might also, the things like the Alibaba, they have the same policy, Play Store as well, they have the same policy, and therefore you can make use of these good platforms to make your brand known, to register your brand, which you are also, if you are also using it as a trademark. And therefore, from there, actually you can see the traditional means of protection of trademark are completely, in most cases, inapplicable online. And therefore, because you cannot register in the entire unit, and the trademark by its very nature is territorial, protection in Kenya will not, registration in Kenya will not give you protection in Puerto Rico or Cape Verde. You will have to access it either through a RIPO if it's a member, or WIPO if it's a member as well. If it's not a member, then you have another challenge, which is an obstacle of accessing it through its actual country of origin. But if you do not have the use of any of these, the ICANN, the International Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, make very good use of complaints from people. It's actually an added layer of protection to trademark owners who have not had access to the countries which they are offering services, because you could be offering services remotely from a different country and goods, and you cannot access that market to register your mark. But ICANN, by producing your registration certificate, you might lodge your dispute at WIPO, and it can be resolved either by agreeing on who will take down the other, or how to use it commonly, how to benefit from each other, or a complete takedown note from that one. And from there, I think I will end up with my presentation. I hope I haven't taken much of your time with my technical issues and apparently some repetitions. Thank you. I'm returning the mic to you, Joy.
Thank you very much, Wilbert. Ladies and gentlemen, that will bring us to the close of our presentation. Bonita, are we able to take a few questions?
Yes, we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Okay, fantastic. Perhaps you can guide us on that.
So we'll take questions from the physical audience here, and then we'll look out for maybe one more question from the online presence. Questions from here? Yes, could we?
Thank you very much. My question is very brief. And what if I want to start up a business and probably register it as, I'm assuming, I'm not saying I'm going to do so, but I'm assuming I want to register a business by names of KTA. Let's say KTA Travel Tours, just as an example. And it so happens that I want to use a particular kind of motto to it. Let me use, remember, most of us are familiar with WBS, right? And its motto was WBS, where quality matters. So in the event I want to open up, let's say, KTA Travel Tours. Would I be messing with an already registered trademark? Or, okay, would I be held liable for doing so? Yes, thank you.
Over to you, Joy. You can select who on the panel will respond to the question.
This being a question relating to selection of a mark, I think Wilson will be better placed to respond to that.
Thank you, Joy. I think the quick answer I would give to that is that as lawyers, it depends. And the reason I say that is because making reference to the presentation I gave, classifications or classes when it comes to trademark registration are very, very important. And if you're just going to register KTA as say, for instance, KTA Advocates appears, then when you go or when you proceed to the trademark registrar, there's going to be a sort of opposition from the registrar telling you that, by the way, there's an already existing company with the name KTA or that uses KTA as part of their branding. So you might encounter some difficulty in registering this, and perhaps maybe one thing that I might have omitted to mention is that when you are selecting a trademark, also try and avoid abbreviations, and that's because abbreviations are fairly common. But if you do the abbreviation in consonance, say, with other components, so say, for instance, you don't just go for KTA, but you do things like you stylize it, say you use italics, you use a very unique font, you use very, very unique colors, or colors that, say, for instance, are not associated or are not used by KTA advocates, then there is a chance that you might get, or you might be allowed to register the mark. Obviously, if so the category or the classification for registration of law firms as well as tours and travel are different. That is the one way how you would ensure you get, or your application for registration of KTA tours and travel is allowed. I hope that answers you.
Thank you, Wilson. I think just to add on to that, the Ugandan perspective is when you're conducting trademark registration, it's mandatory for you to conduct a search. When you submit your application for a search, the already existing trademark. So, like Wilson said, it would depend. The classification, it might be, KTA is within the legal services industry, and then you have, if it wants maybe a tour and travel company that's offering a service, if it were a company that is offering a good, and you'd have that registered in a different class. So as they mentioned, there are over 45 classes under the NIST classification system, of which you have, I think, 11 within the service category of trademark registration, and then the others that are within the goods registration. Collins has a question. Collins?
Thank you very much. My question is around domains and trademarks, and also cross-jurisdiction, right? So if you have an existing trademark, and I'll just use an example, WAPI, and this has already been registered as a domain for the .com top-level domain name, but there is no registered trademark. You're a Ugandan entity, the other company that's using this domain is a US entity. Now, if you want to take over that trademark, what would be the process, right? But here's a hypothetical. If I go ahead and register it as a trademark in the US and also as a trademark in Uganda, do I then have priority over being the owner of that trademark if this person never registered it as a trademark within their jurisdiction?
Joy, I think Wilbert will be best placed, right, to respond to the question.
Indeed.
Wilbert?
All right. Yes. Hello, Joy. You have a classic case of a clash between a domain name and a trademark. And now we'll try to see which one prevails. But of course, in all jurisdictions, I believe in every civilized country, they adage that the one who is earlier in time is always stronger in right, is almost applicable everywhere, even in domain name related disputes. Therefore, you could actually be the first one to register the trademark in a certain country, but lose the right to it nevertheless. Because you are not going to get ownership of someone else's reputation as well as acquire the distinction simply because you are the first one to register the trademark. That's why we have other things that they are normally considered the well-known marks. Now, depending on how well known is the domain name, you might not stand a chance against it, even if you register in its original country as well as here, as well as in our original country. It might happen that they did not register, but they have acquired a distinction by virtue of long use and advertisement, having made a lot of investment, well known, and everybody else have actually associating the services and goods they have. Therefore, registration certificate, sometimes it cannot be the only one which will give you a prime ownership of a certain mark. You might meet other competitors who might not have obtained registration, but they might yet still prevent you from registering the particular trademark. I made a clear example of a JD, of a certain case which happened here in Tanzania, in our country. And actually, when the person saw the services which were being offered outside the country, he rushed and registered it as a trademark here. But when the owners got wind of it, they lodged a civil suit. They successfully obtained an injunction against the person who registered as a trademark. And what were they using? Their notoriety and famousy, having been earlier in the market, having had a domain name much more earlier than the registered trademark. Therefore, the secondary consideration is actually being a well-known mark will override the right even of a registered trademark owner. I hope that will answer your question. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Colin says it has. And I think just for homework, Collins, follow up on the Afrochella-Coachella battle that's ongoing. It has questions that might be similar to what you're asking presently. So we'll go to the next person, the gentleman at the back, and then we'll have you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to pose my question. Well, mine goes to the team, which is remote. So I've got a scenario. I've founded a company. It's run for 5 years. Let's say the name is Alibaba Robust Recruitment. And then 5 years down the road, I've brought in business partners, but probably we've fallen apart. And then I'm thinking of exiting and then setting up a similar business. And now my plan is to name it, instead of Alibaba Robust Recruitment, I name it now Alibaba Recruitment. this business has no, the old business doesn't have a trademark. It's not registered as a trademark, and my plan is to register the new one as a trademark. So I don't know where do I fall here. Will I be successful against whatever the older business? Thank you.
Over to you, Joy.
Thank you for that. Victor, are you happy to take this?
Yes, I am. In Uganda, there's a separate entity which is involved with the registration of marks, which is, I think it's the Uganda, if I could just pull up my notes just a bit, just a little bit.
Uganda Registration Services Bureau,
Yes,
URSB.
Uganda Registration Services Bureau, which is quite different from the registrar of companies. If you look at the Intel case, you'll see that the first entity to have, so there was this company which was incorporated, I think, sometime in 2002 in Uganda, which now was incorporated under the name of Intel Company Limited. And then now there's the Intel International Company. So in as much as the Intel Company Limited was successfully registered under the company's registry, the mark is supposed to be registered now separately with now this other entity, the Uganda Registration Bureau. In order to ensure that you have maximum protection of your mark, in as much as you've already registered the company, there's also need to ensure that you've also registered the mark with the relevant authority, because the registration under one does not afford you like a complete protection of the intellectual property right if you've not specifically gone to register the intellectual property right with the right intellectual property office. So now, to answer your question, is because this other entity had not per se registered the mark, then the mark might be registered because it does not exist in that register. Now, however, if you go by the decision in the Intel case, this means that in any case, these other people use this mark in the market, then you might not have legal recourse because the court held that there was no like now Intel International, the Intel local company in Uganda had not infringed on the intellectual property right of Intel, because when it went to conduct the search, that name was available and it was available for registering. So the simple answer to your question is yes, you can be able to register, but now out of abundance of caution, there's now need to now go that extra step ahead to ensure that your mark is now well protected. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
And perhaps just to add slightly to that, what Victor is saying, you might, in fact, your first challenge might be registering the company itself, because in the company's register, then a similar name exists. So you've got to overcome that challenge first. If that mark is not registered within Uganda, you might be able to register it in the trademarks registry, but enforcing it might also be a challenge for you if you're dealing with the same product as your former company, because the previous company is still dealing with those products and has their products in the market. For you to be able to enforce a trademark, if you register it, then you will have to convince the court that this company is infringing on your right. But if their products existed in the market before you registered your mark, you might have a challenge with enforcement. So you might be able to get it registered, but enforcement might be a problem for you. I get that perhaps what informs your wanting to register a similar mark is to make good of of the goodwill that exists with the name. But seeing that it might be a challenge for you to enforce, you might want to reconsider that strategy.
Thank you, Joy. Just before we go for our last question, I would like to offer some clarity. So the Uganda Registration Services Bureau is one bureau that deals with registration of businesses and other services, including intellectual property. So the distinction is under URSB, you will find the company's registry, and then you'll find the intellectual property registry, and then there's a marriages registry and different registries. Though, of course, as you've seen from the Intel case, is that they are not plugged in together or synced together, so that if someone went to register a company, the name reservation or the search for the name is not run through, say, the IP system. So you'd be able to find a company with a name of an already existing trademark, which is really what happened in this particular case. So we'll have our last question. Yes, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. My name is Esther. My question is almost similar to his, only that mine would be, it's a hypothetical one. If the company, let me say there was a company called Crown Papers, and maybe because of liquidation and debt, they closed. And I also come up and say I want a company and I want it to be called Crown Papers. Will I be held liable?
Joy, is it in respect of company registration or trademark registration?
Trademark registration.
Over to you, Joy.
Sorry, Bonita, I might have missed the last bit of that question, so allow me to ask Wilbert to address that, if he got the entire question. I missed the last bit.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah, so if I heard the person who was asking correctly, he was trying to understand if she can adopt and use a name of a liquidated company as a trademark, as our own trademark, for a simple use that is not being used. Now, that being the case, I'm not sure about other countries, but if I would speak for Tanzania, we actually have a time within which, if the trademark procedures, there are actually procedures for application to expunge a certain trademark for non-use. You can also apply for expungement of a certain trademark if it's not being used. You can apply to use a certain trademark if it's not being used somewhere else, even if it was there. Therefore, I think under that aspect, if it was here, it could be possible still to use a name of a company which is decommissioned or it's no longer working, or it's no longer offering the services or goods, to adopt it as a trademark. Of course, you might meet a rejection or opposition from the holders who are still holding on to the reputation. But also your argument against the opposition could be a non-use or non-existence of that company. And that might, if you are lucky, you might retain, you might be able to keep and proceed with the registration as your own trademark. I hope that answers your question.
She says it does. Joy, any parting shots before we close?
Hi, Bonita.
Hi.
I think from our end, it would just be to say thank you to the entire KTA fraternity and all the guests who have attended and made this the success that it has been. I, on my end, have certainly learned a lot throughout the day, and I hope everyone else has. So our sincerest gratitude from the GVA fraternity, and I believe from everyone else. Thank you, and we'll continue tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I learned today that it's a public holiday in Kenya, so we really appreciate the team from Kenya for making the time. I hope that, as it is the case with Uganda, that a public holiday means no work day. And I presume that you are working today and have made the time to be able to attend and conduct this class. It's been a very fruitful discussion. You've conducted a very brilliant class. I'm pretty sure everyone who is here and listened in from or watched from online wherever they are has been able to benefit and understood the importance of using trademarks as a tool for branding. With that, we'll bring this session to a close. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.